Alright, I think we should be good to go. Things should be working fine. Yeah, no. You have to go make yourself some coffee. No problem. Yeah, me too. That's why I sat down, got everything ready, was like, alright, let's go. And I was like, reached over to grab a sip of my coffee and went, there's nothing in this cup. I need to go make some coffee. That's kind of the microcosm of this morning, at least morning for me at this point. It's been interesting. You might see a little white blur come in around here-ish. That's my dog. I thought my partner gave him his medicine with his food this morning, because usually those things go together. They had not, so he's a little extra this morning. So if you see him running around like a crazy person, that's why. But his med should start taking effect soon, so he may just chill out. We'll see. Just wait for if anybody else can join real quick, and while I do that, get a few side things set up. Hopefully you guys are you're doing all right. Things are going well for you. Things are going okay for me. Things are not too bad, all things considered. Let's see. Let's get in here. Get a few things set up on my end, pulling up some documents and whatnot, and then we'll be good to go. Just getting this going. Here we go. Let's do that. Go ahead and throw that in. We're gonna throw this over here, I think. Yeah, let's do that. This, and then we'll pull this up here. Move there. Do this. Hopefully that's everything. I guess I could tell people I'm streaming. I don't know. I'm a little late already, so rather than spend a bunch of time doing that, shows me that I'm not as a cutthroat of a YouTuber as I should be, where I should be spending a bunch of my time promoting my own stuff, but not necessarily why I'm doing this. Doing this just for myself, and hopefully you find it useful as well. We'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I've been doing and putting together, and we'll move on from there. Let's get this changed. Alright, I think we're good. So we're going to talk about potentially a few things today. Usually I stream for about 2 to 3 hours usually. So somewhere in there, we'll try to get it hooked up. So the first thing I thought we'd do, because it's come up lately, and didn't play D&D yesterday, so we don't have any session recap or anything like that. The two people whose places we sometimes play at, both were out this week, so we're like, oh, well, I guess we're not playing. So, which is fine. I didn't finish the prep, so if we have a little extra time at the end, we'll jump in and maybe work on the prep so you can kind of see it live, see kind of how I go about it, and we can put that together. But I am going to play. Was not going to have a game tomorrow, but actually we're going to jump in and do sort of a. Only one of our DM is actually missing in that group. They're the one who's out. So the three of us that are in that group sometimes play this sort of headless, sort of like solo D&D kind of game, but with the group, where we each kind of take turns jumping in and being the DM for the scene when it's called for, or otherwise doing a lot of the same oracle rolls and roll tables and things, normal ways that you usually play a solo TTRPG. It's usually a bunch of oracle rolls. And it's kind of a hex crawly one, so that's kind of fun. So because of that, I was like, oh, well, I should go over the hex stocking update, because I'll probably use that tomorrow at some point. So it's like, oh, that'd be a good one for the stream, because I don't think we've gone over that on stream yet. I can't remember. I don't think we've done that. So I figured we'd do that first. So it's just a slight update, just really one thing has changed, but it's nice to go over. So let's go ahead and hop over there and take a look at that first. Let's do that. Alright, here we go. Bam! Turn down music in my ears a little bit. Not the stream's music, but my music. Go here. Alright, so this is the update for my 1d12 1d20 hex stopping update. We'll talk about why it's sometimes a dual dice table. We can talk about that real quick. If you, for some reason, this is your first time watching, hey, thanks for showing up. We've got some fun stuff for you. Hang out. We're fun people. I guarantee it. Probably. We're fun. Yeah. So we're gonna go over hex stopping update. So why are there 2 dice? Just for anybody who's not familiar with this table, if you haven't seen this before, because maybe your first time on stream, or you haven't seen one of my other hex mapping, stocking streams, or any of the solo RPG play that I've done. So we'll do this. So when you roll them, so this is the table. It has 20 entries on it. There's a little line here between 12 and 13, and that's the differentiation of which dice you're using. So why would you roll a d12 versus a d20? So I have the system set up as to, when you're rolling for points of interest to put into a hex map, it's dependent on whether you're in what they call the Heartlands. And in the Heartlands is the area where, as you might suspect, it's very, very civilized. That's where most of your cities are going to show up. That's where most sort of knights and castles and all that stuff is usually in that crux, that bowl, that crucible of civilization. And so when you're in those areas, you roll the d12, and it has mostly humanoid stuff. And you're back, catching up at 1.75. You can probably skip most of it. We haven't gone over anything interesting yet. We're just now getting into it. Yeah, so the first 12 kind of represent more Heartlands coded stuff, and then those 13 through 20, that back half kind of represents more of a hodgepodge of things you might find in a Marches or Borderlands, Frontier, as when you're getting further and further away from civilization, as well as things that you're going to find primarily in the Deep Wilds. So that's it. So I use a 2 dice system, so it just kind of depends when I'm stocking hexes as to which die I use to roll on the table. And since I've got it highlighted, why don't we use the bottom half first? We'll talk about these first. So these are the things that kind of only show up in the Marches too. Yeah, my dog has coffee too. My dog does not need any caffeine. I guarantee you. He's got plenty of energy. That would be very, very, very bad. So in 13 through 20, we mainly have things like ruins are one of the first things. So anything that's, and I use ruins here because anything that's, and it's not in what you might think a civilized area, because in a civilized area, usually the ruins are co-opted for something else. Usually somebody will go and take all the stones to build their own buildings, or they'll find a ruin and rebuild it, because why would you not use a building that somebody's already half built if you could? That's just a nice time and resource saver for you, especially if it's a real sturdy thing like something that's made out of stone. So any ruins that you're going to find are primarily further off in it. Now you can roll on the second half. I don't always roll a d12 for things that are in those sort of Heartlands areas. There is a scale in which you can also roll a d20 on it. So that doesn't mean the ruins will never show up there. Just that usually they're showing up in sort of the Borderlands area or in the Deep Wild somewhere. And then, so that's 13. That's the ruin. Now I moved conflict area, which I think was technically earlier on in early editions, at some point was higher, but I ended up moving that down because I wanted the civilized Heartlands area to feel like it's more under law and under control. So there's not a lot of sort of open conflicts, open battles and skirmishes happening most of the time. Now there are still the random encounters you come into when you're going across, so bandit encounters and stuff like that. There's plenty of that sort of stuff. But as far as sort of a larger sort of scaled battles, not nearly as much. But that makes a lot more sense on the frictional area between sort of like borderlands, between different nations, different kingdoms and things like that, where that makes a lot more sense. And especially when you get to the frontiers or the wilds, you start thinking about dealing with monsters and all other nasties that live in the dark corners of the world. And that's where you can kind of find those sort of conflict areas. You don't know how I manage with the somber, relaxing sitting area. It's like the anti-coffee. No, I find it relaxing, so that way I can focus in. I guess that's sort of the difference for me. Round robin, a great fit for really explore your hex crawl. Yeah, round robin as in players. That makes sense. Yeah, where you're running more of a West Marches kind of thing. Yeah, lots of stuff like that. I've played in a few games. I've never run a West Marches style game, and I'm not sure I would want to. Just because I find it difficult enough to manage a small number of players. And also the West Marches has a very sort of emphasis on doing in and out, like go into the adventure and get out of the adventure in every play session. And I like dungeons to be sort of a little bit more meatier, sort of like 2 to 3 session adventures, kind of like my specific sweet spot for stuff like dungeons. So West Marches hasn't been a thing that's really locked on to me. Oh, the relationship between results. Yeah, it's just trying to scale it a little bit so the world kind of has a little bit more of that verisimilitude, so it feels like, oh yeah, well obviously when you're in the Heartlands area, you're going to run across a lot more settlements and a lot more temples and castles and stuff like that, but as you get further and further out, you're going to have very, very different results. So yeah, the conflict area is number 14. Number 15 is a no trespassing area. A no trespassing area is means an area that people are not supposed to be in, and that kind of comes from different ways. That could be something like a Kingswood, like you're not supposed to be in there because if you're in there, you're probably a poacher. You're not supposed to be hunting like the king's deer and things like that. It could be an area where there are hill folk living, so people who are living outside the law, outlaws, and people who are outside of civilization, society, backwoods, hill folk. I usually just call it hill folk. It's just sort of a broad blanket term for these sorts of people who live sort of on the edge of civilization or in their own. They live outside of the general civilization. So if you get in there, if you get into that area, you might have some sort of encounter with them. They might be angry that you're in there. Other no trespassing areas, you can sometimes do hazards, but hazards has its own result. So you don't necessarily, but those are kind of the big ones, or there's some sort of warning area or something like that. I don't have it broken out. We can look at, well, actually I have the sheet in front of me. We just look at, because I have sub-examples for all of these things. I just haven't worked them in yet. I'm in the process of doing that in my larger document that this is part of. What did we say? We were talking about... No, get that. Almost there. No trespassing areas. That includes hillfolk tribal lands, neutral monster lands, some sort of sacred ground, like it's a burial ground, or a holy site, or consecrated or desecrated ground that you're not supposed to be in. A private reserve, like the Kingswood that we talked about, wildlife preserve, forested area. Or some sort of wild things domain, so that means like a Fey Forest, a Witch Sabbath site, something like that. There's some sort of area where it's like, if you get into this area, you probably shouldn't be here, and there's probably going to be some sort of trouble because you're here. Oh, does 13 and 20 ever migrate into the 1 to 12? Yeah, so when I'm rolling for our Heartlands, there's about a 50% chance of when I'm rolling for Heartlands that I'm going to roll on the 1d12 table, and then a 2 in 6 chance I'm going to roll on the d20 table. So in the Heartlands, you're still going to end up with sometimes stuff that's in this 13 to 20 range, though most of the time it's going to be 1 through 12, because even when you're rolling a d20, there's still a, 70% chance that you're going to, 60% chance that you're going to end up with something in 1 through 12 anyways as a result. So it kind of gives that idea where it's like, the further you get out, the results start to become a little bit more dispersed, more variety in it. It's just a weird little thing that I liked, and when I was toying around and making this table, and I was like, oh, that's really useful. That's kind of what I wanted to do, so I don't have to think about. I can trust in the dice that the dice will give me the result I need when I'm rolling on it, not having to roll a result and be like, oh, I don't want that result, and then swapping it out. because it doesn't fit the vibe. Like having something like a wandering monster, like a big CR wandering monster right next to the king's castle, like a couple miles from a king's castle, and you're like, well, that doesn't really make a ton of sense. So it just kind of helps to mess with that a little bit. Oh, the stamps are for marking the results on hexes. Yes. So I use a web app called HexTML. HEXTML. Ooh, that's not what I was trying to do. Oh, I screwed this up. Oh no, I was trying to click on something else. I was trying to remember. So it's HexTML, HEXTML.playtest.net. And it's just a web app, and it allows you to put little stamps on there, so that way I can see it very quickly and know a general idea of what's in every hex without having to open up the description for that hex. So it's super useful. If you've seen some of my other streams where I use it, or some of the solo dungeon, solo play streams, I use it there, and you can see it work because I just use it live as the hex map as I'm going through it. And when I discover stuff, I add stuff to the map. Ooh, you're wrestling with a want for narrative and expedition events. Yeah, so pretty much anything that's a narrative event, you get that from some sort of quest giver. That's usually how I do it, and usually you're going to get a quest giver in some sort of settlement or some place like that. Somebody who wants something or needs something or gives you an idea for something, or maybe it's just a treasure map, whatever it is. And to have those things, and also some of these things, some of these locations will generate that sort of stuff. Like if you have, like we were talking about, a conflict area. So if you have a conflict area, you got to know the factions who are at, you know, loggerheads with each other, and that can give you adventure threads. If you adventure ideas for, hey, each side probably wants something and they're having difficulty getting it and they're fighting over it, so there's a place where adventurers can step in and end up on one side or the other and kind of push that conflict forward to resolution in some way. Oh, your solution has been to put the narrative into play by post roleplaying. Interesting. You have strict timekeeping wherein actual adventures could be planned as expeditions for live session. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm doing it online that way. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, that gives you a lot of... I like that idea of having a separate sort of area that's kind of a... The narrative aspect's kind of in town. Just kind of light RP, town time kind of stuff. Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. Follow up on the migration thing. Do you have any relationships between hexes, like a situation in one hex bleeding out or pouring out into others? Sometimes. I usually don't write that down. Usually that's something I improv while I'm playing. Sometimes I do. I do have things where it's like, oh, there's a hermit, like in the current campaign I'm running. Oh, there's a hermit here, and I was like, okay, why is this hermit here? And it's like, oh, well, they're related because they're an outlaw because they did something bad in the village that's like a hex or two hexes over. It's like, oh, and so if you go back and forth, you can learn about each hex you can learn about the village from that person, or you can learn about that person from the village. Either one. So they give you information about the hexes that are around, and then, yeah, but I usually leave that up to sort of an improv thing as I'm going through it, because I want the flexibility to be able to create those links or disregard those links as what feels kind of right while I'm playing at the table, rather than trying to make those ironclad. Because if the players are never interested in that hermit and they never go there, then it doesn't really matter what their relationship is with somebody that's in a village that they also don't visit. So there's not a lot of I try not to waste too much time trying to make everything fully interconnected like this gigantic spider web. So after no trespassing area, we have 16, which is treasure rumors. These are places where they're like, oh, well, there's the lost tomb of this person is thought to be in this area. And sometimes that's a legitimate thing, and then I also have in sort of my sub-things, my subtasks, is that every once in a while, it's a red herring. There's either nothing there, it's already been looted, or sometimes it's an ambush, like somebody's fed you bad information to kind of get you isolated alone, and they're going to try to rob you or something like that. Or, you know, maybe that's where a cult finds their sacrificial victims, because they find people, and then the story back in town is just, oh, well, they went looking for the, you know, El Dorado, and we never saw them again, so, you know, something happened to them. So yeah, kind of creating the ability to have adventure aspects. But yeah, that's 16, so it's a treasure rumor. So usually they learn about this. This is a great place that I use to throw in magic items for the game. Is like, there are just magic items just laying around that you guys can find sometimes when you're playing with me and I'm running a game. It's like, if you want to go track down the lost tomb of, in the current campaign I'm running, they have the lost tomb of Okeanos. If you want to go track down Okeanos' potentially lost tomb, there's probably a magic item in there. If you can find it, and if you can get through it. And if it's real. Because it might not be real either. But the only way to know is to go find out. So treasure rumors are super easy, just kind of throw that one in. I like to do a mix sometimes. One of the ones that I have right now is there's some sort of a vault that's tied to some sort of fiendish entity. I know that. I don't know any more about it because I haven't had a chance to, none of the players have come to a position in which to be introduced to that information. And once they're introduced to that information, then I'll improv a little bit, and then when I get to the end of the session, I'll be like, okay, let's figure out what that tomb is, and if they're interested in actually going and trying to find it. If they grab that adventure hook and it hooks them in the mouth, and they're like, oh, well, we should go find out that, which is likely because I have 2 player characters in the current campaign that have ties to outsiders. So non-material plane entities. So, and I guess technically 3. But I wasn't including gods. So 2. So they're probably the ones that would be interested in checking out something like that. So if they jump on that, then I'm like, okay, now I'm going to go actually flush it out. But until they decide that they want to go check that out, it's just a thing that's around. You sort of want to have factions taking hex crawl turns sometimes as the party does. Yeah, you can definitely have faction turns. Depending on how you run your game and the size or scope of your game, yeah, it's pretty easy to work in faction turns. What I usually do is I like to use the resource die mechanic, which means that I have factions or something that's going on in the world that I know is going to happen if nothing else stops them, mainly the PCs. And then at the end of each session, I just roll a die. If I roll a 1 on the die, it reduces to the next lowest size of die. If I roll a 1 on the 1d4, it goes down to just 1, which means that after the next session, I'm going to start trying to work in specifically what happens. So it just kind of builds in a little bit of a time thing. And then every time you reduce the die, usually I try to put in some sort of foreshadowing, some sort of note that, hey, something's going on in the background. Like, it's something they learn about, or if it's something tied to the PCs, usually that's when I'll do something like they have a weird prophetic dream about something, or a warning about something, or they get a letter from an NPC they know talking to them about it, something of that nature. Go for a walk in the ruins of Weregild, you might find Gladdering, yeah. If you don't get cooked by trolls, yeah. Treasure rumors, yeah. You haven't tried that before, yeah. Ooh, treasure rumors are really great for rifle parties. Absolutely. If you have multiple parties playing in the same area, especially if you just drop it in. If somebody walks into town with a treasure map, that's a great way to get rival parties going and get them into a bidding war for that person over who's going to pay them the most for that treasure map. And then, you know, you set some sort of time period. And, you know, maybe that treasure map's probably that treasure map should be real, but occasionally it should also not be real. Like, but the map's real, but the place they go to is not something. It's some sort of shyster who's trying to get one over on them and then quickly makes an exit from town. Indiana Jones and the hex crawl of greedy adventuring. Absolutely. What you're talking about there sounds like timers. Yes, it is a timer. Yeah, so I use the resource die mechanic as a timer. Every encounter with possible layer could have an associated map. Absolutely. A lot of these can be dungeons. The Ruin can be a dungeon. The conflict area is probably not a dungeon, but it could be more of a like wilderness point crawl if you want to do something small where they're crossing back and forth between like enemy lines, borders, and areas and trees and trying to keep cover and all that sort of stuff. Wandering monsters. Yeah, let's talk about wandering monsters. So wandering monsters is just what it is. Like there's an area in which there is a monster that's usually not here that has found its way here. So on my thing, I have 4 little things for wandering monsters. They're either trying to establish a lair, they're foraging, which includes something like if you have a... Because I wanted results that work for whether they're humanoid or more beast-like, so whether they're intelligent or not. So if they're intelligent, establishing a lair means they're making a base somewhere, a base of operations somewhere. If they're foraging, they're gathering supplies or intel. If they're lost, they're a party trying to get somewhere and they have no idea where they are. They have lost their way and they're just kind of camped out until they can figure out where they're supposed to go. Or they're scouting. So they're looking around, checking out the surroundings. Maybe they're an advanced party for a larger force. And if you do that all for something that's more like bestial, you end up with establishing a lair. Right, they've wandered into the area and they're looking for a new home. They're foraging, so they could be hunting. That could mean that they're attacking cattle or sheep or something like that in the nearby area, or eating up the grain, attacking the granaries, things like that. They could very much just be lost. Maybe this is something that's been peeled off from a larger pack of something. It could be a pack of direwolves and there's just like one direwolf that's kind of out by itself because maybe it got injured or something like that and it's lost its pack and doesn't know where they are. And it could be scouting, which means that there's just sort of you could interpret that also as hunting or prowling or defending their territory. You can put that in as scouting. They try to carve out new territory for themselves. So yeah, that's wandering monsters. Super easy. They're really useful, especially when you're playing low-level stuff. In those levels like 1 through 4 in D&D, there's so many beasts, because that's where most of the beast creatures are, at least in 5e 2024, that you can throw in there. You have a wolf pack that's moved into the area that's a problem. You have a belay that's in there. You have maybe a new tribe of goblins that have moved into the area, all that sort of stuff that just makes sense. It's like they put up shop here. And if you talk to them, they probably have some information about the lands beyond where the player characters are at the moment. And give you some information about, again, you talked about like looking at potentially other hexes. Well, do I have another established monster layer somewhere that I could be like, oh, well, they were here, but then they got kicked out, or they're a splinter group, there's some sort of schism that happened and they separated and went their own way, or a bigger, badder monster came in and kicked them out. Any of that sort of stuff. So you can create the narratives on the fly pretty easily, or at least I can. That's usually how I do it. Be like, oh, there's a monster layer over here. Maybe they got kicked out. Maybe they can tell you that there's a bigger, badder monster that's in that cave over there, and they can tell you about. Maybe you guys can ally up together and try to go after it, or maybe you leave it a lot of wide open space for how the players want to deal with that situation. They could just kill goblins and that's it, or they can talk to the goblins. They can. So it doesn't always have to be a combat or something like that. Yeah, and then the scout party from the Hobgoblin Empire crosses paths. Exactly. Messenger from the Kingdom, yeah, who seems to be actually fleeing. Do I separate monsters between wanderers and territorial ones? No, I let the hex do that. So I don't do that in general. You could. You could. I think that would be like, for me, that means that kind of halves the monsters that I can use in any given situation. And I'd rather have the full repertoire of monsters at my fingertips to use, rather than being like, oh, I can't use gnolls for this layer encounter because they're usually nomadic, so they wouldn't have maybe this monster layer. Instead of being like, no, gnolls can be in here, but they could also be just running around in the plain somewhere. You never stop imagining intelligent monsters having a plan or purpose when they're traveling. Yeah, they should. They should be doing something. Like I said, sometimes the answer is just they're lost. They don't know where they are. They've gotten turned around, and you can either attack them because they're monsters in the area, or the players could talk to them and be like, "Oh, you're just lost. Okay, well you just need to head that way, probably a few days, and you're going to be back on track." And you could have some sort of social exchange that way. Ooh, you want your PCs to want to manage the territory, incentivize scouting and recon and reports. Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah, set them up as sort of a King's Rangers kind of situation. Yeah, I could see that. That'd be a fun campaign. Give them this idea. Giving them the idea that I assume that they're Rangers, they have a pretty good understanding, so you might just give them the hex map, just the geographic hex map, just so they have an idea if they're familiar with the area already. So they don't have to. So that takes out some of the exploration aspect. But I mean, they would know where like mountains and forests and rivers and that kind of stuff was, probably in the area. But they might not know necessarily. They might have never come across the barrow mound that's in that area, or never gone inside it, if they even know about it. But they have sort of a general idea of where stuff is, as far as the natural geography of an area, and where settlements are, probably, and roads. You need a monster situation table. Are they lost, hungry, wounded, angry, in heat, etc.? Yeah, in my Dungeon Masters... I've got it right here. My Dungeon Master folder. I have a little 1d10 chart in here that I sometimes use. It's actually a monster's pre-battle chart. A little roll table. And it's just a d10, and it just tells me, like, hey, this is what the monsters are doing. They're having some sort of argument. They're doing something with food. They're being handy, which means they're crafting, dismantling, maintaining, or repairing gear that necessarily doesn't work for more bestial ones. Though the bestial ones might be trying to get into something. If there were crates or barrels or something like that, that's what they might be doing. They're doing some sort of hygiene action. They're bathing or cleaning each other, doing first aid, grooming. They're doing some sort of leisure. They might be playing, betting, singing. They might be getting drunk. They're doing some sort of rest. They're doing a hobby. They're reading, they're storytelling, or they're just sleeping. They're doing some sort of studying, drilling, sparring, teaching, or testing each other. They're just having a talk. They might be berating each other, having a discussion, joking, or maybe trying to troubleshoot an issue. They could just be doing work. Might be admin work, could be guarding a place. They could be doing just labor or practicing some sort of skill or tool. And they might be worshiping. So yeah, I have that for, what are they doing in this area? If I really need to know, just right off the hand real quick, what are they doing? Oh, these guys are bandaging each other. So it looks like they got into a scrape. Do you want to ask them about the scrape they got into? If yes, you start talking to them. I might look at the hexes around and be like, okay, they got into, looks like they got into a scrape with people from this area. Or you might find that out and then realize that, oh, if you take a look at the stuff with them and maybe you roll some dice, maybe have some perception checks or some insight checks and be like, oh, it looks like they actually just raided that location. And now you're talking to them after their raid where they think they're safe. And maybe they're being a little cagey and dodgy, so do you attack them there and slay them and take the stuff that they stole and take it back to the place, or keep it for yourselves, or you make some trade deal for discretion? You just extort them, be like, hey, you're going to give us this, this, and this, and if you do that, we're not going to kill you, and we're not going to tell the people where you went. So that's just a situation, and the players can handle that however they want, depending on what kind of players you have. Just realize that the situation you provide should match whatever tone you want for the game. So, like in the example from Cant, if you're looking for something where you want them to be sort of warders of the land and border rangers, well, then they probably shouldn't be extorting monsters. they should be protecting the realm, which means that they're probably going to have to deal with these things, which means maybe bringing them in to the court, to the king to see. That might be just killing them right there and returning their stuff. Just kind of means, or maybe you let them go for right now and go check out the location first to see what happened and see maybe they just traded for this stuff and it was a trade gone wrong or some sort of weird cultural or language barrier issue that sparked off something. So you can still approach it and have a lot of different ideas about what to do without having to be like, well, the PCs are just chaotic, selfish all the time. They report to the home base about a place that was raided. Yeah, send an envoy to assist, exploit the weakness. Extorting monsters opens an entire strategic relationship. Yeah. Putting you in a very ruthless Sun Tzu state of mind. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your players are. If your players are showing up to play a heroic fantasy, then they're not going to do that. If you're showing up with you're playing more of an old school game where they're just like trying to accumulate wealth and they're kind of cutthroats in their own right. Yeah, and they have the numbers and they have the power to extort. They can get loot out of monsters without actually having to fight them. I mean, why not do that? It seems like a nice idea to me. Don't spend any resources and get something, rather than spend some resources and maybe get some more, or spend some resources and maybe die. Especially if you're playing an old school, like an OSR type of game where dying's real easy, so you don't really want to get into a lot of combats. So after wandering monsters, we have 18, which is landmark, landform, or wonder. So usually this is just something you look at, and I like to think about the old Oregon Trail video game that at least I played in school. I know I'm old. I think they probably still do that to some degree. The idea, and you're like, oh, it's Independence Rock. The thing that, it's a landmark, it tells you where things are. It could be a landform, maybe like a giant arch, or a hoodoo, or a mesa, and I'm using only Southwest US examples. Could be like a bog, or a big tree, or landmarks and landforms and wonders don't necessarily also have to be natural. They can also be artificial. So maybe it's like an arch, like a Roman arch, like the Arch of Paris kind of situation, Arch of Triumph. You see a monolith, a stela, something like that just kind of marks that way, or could literally just be. I mean, usually not going to be a signpost because there's another area for it, but it's some sort of like landmark. It also could be an area like, could be something weird, so some sort of extraplanar thing. So it might be some sort of haunted fairy wood, and so that's not really an adventure location. I mean, you can go in there and do adventure. You might get ported to the Feywild if you do that. But you could also just be like, hey, that's the Feywood. We don't go in there, but now we know where we are because that's most certainly the Feywood, because it's got weird mushrooms and everything's in pink and purple pastel neon colors. and run off that way. So yeah, it's usually some sort of natural wonder. It could be a big waterfall. It could be a lot of different things. Kind of whatever you want. It's just really a place for the player characters to be able to look at and be like, I know where we are because that's a landmark for me. You left out Conquer the World. Yeah. Could have meeting places, or just, yeah, we have meeting places. We'll get to them in a second. Meeting places is one of the things that's on this table. It's number 7, actually. They're just meeting places. Yeah. As well as travel havens. There's likelihood that you'll run into people at travel havens. So after landmarks are remains. So remains are slightly different than ruins. So ruins are structures, and remains are non-structures. So that could be wagons. It could be a bunch of bleached animal bones, a big dragon skeletal corpse that's in the land. It could be a shipwreck. It could be a lot of different things. And that could have loot inside of it. It might have scavengers that you might have to contend with that are either humanoids, and civilized folks who are just scavengers, or might be some sort of monsters. Maybe something has made it their lair, or something like that, or maybe somebody's hunting in that area. It could be a lot of different things. And so it's just a nice little adventure site. So it's very close. Remains are very close to treasure rumors. The difference is with the treasure rumor, you know that there's supposed to be some sort of specific, either a specific like item or a high likelihood of there being a pretty significant amount of wealth. That's why you go after it. The wealth is the important thing. You're chasing the treasure. And the remains are just kind of a thing you find. And kind of represents a slightly different type of situation. So let me do an example. So remains, I'm thinking like a shipwreck, and be like, oh, this ship wrecked off the coast just recently, and we need you to go and retrieve a very specific item that the captain had in his quarters. It's probably not a magic item, it's probably not something of specific worth, except for the people who are asking for it. Or maybe they want the logbook, even though that would be super saturated with water, so I don't know why you need it for anything, but maybe you could find some information off of it. Do that, whereas the treasure rumor, if I was going to make it a treasure rumor site, that would be something more like a treasure galleon sunk. You're like, oh, well, there's a bunch of treasure in there, so we should definitely figure out a way to get there. And sometimes just finding the thing and getting to it is the adventure. So if it's treasure, you know that the galleon sunk in this area, but that's also deep water, so you got to figure out some way for your player characters to get all the way down to the bottom of the sea at that point, which is a whole different type of adventure and planning to try to figure that out. Whereas the remains are something like, when I think about, like, well, you can see like half of the shipwreck sticking out of the water. And people know about it, and people can see it. But the adventure is not sort of finding it and getting the loot out of it. It may have already been picked over. It may be super recent, whereas the galleon might have been down there for, I don't know, 100 years. If you want to. Because that's the rumor of it. It's not known. It's not a known quantity, necessarily. Where the remains are always going to be a known quantity. Unless nobody knows about it. Either nobody knows about it, or people do know about it. It's just one of those two. Usually it's not, whereas the treasure rumor kind of lives in that in-between space. And number 20 is just a hazard. So it's just a hazardous area for the player characters. And the easiest way to do this is just kind of run down some of the examples I have. And usually I just have it broken up by what is the danger here. Air or atmosphere, exposure or weather, it's usually the problem. Some sort of terrain, either ground or water. Flora, some sort of plant that's the problem. I feel very much like a Lotus Eaters kind of feeling. Like this is a field that you walk into and lose your memory and those sorts of things. But that could also fall under psychological, which is one of them. So anything that's a psychological effect, that makes me think of, oh, I don't remember the name of the event. Anyways, it's back in the 70s? Question mark? A number of Russian, or I guess Soviet students at that time, college students, university students, were going on like a skiing backpacking trip, or they're traveling between two places, and they had to take this guide with them, and then they camp in the night in the winter, and then we don't really know what happens to this day. Something happened, and they're all like dead. And they're dead in like weird places. They like left the tent. One of them, I think, bit off part of their tongue. Some of them are like nude or in weird clothing. Some different states of disrobe, but it's like it's evident there wasn't like a fire in the tent or anything like that, and people are just. So that's like a weird. If you wanted to look at the aftermath of some sort of weird psychological effect. One of the things that they think about as far as a psychological effect is that I guess there's an area nearby in which there is a convergence of hills that makes sort of a whistling sound that I guess has been known, that effect has been known to drive people kind of mad. I think kind of a Chinese water torture kind of effect. So they think maybe that's what happened, because people just started acting weird. Maybe they all took a bunch of drugs and freaked out. We have no idea what happened. And then fauna. Fauna's the last one. So if it has some sort of... The hazard is some sort of animal in it. So... again, that's another place to kind of put a monster if you want to drop a monster in there. Which is slightly different than a monster lair and slightly different than a wandering monster. This is usually where I would put something that might be like a pack that makes sense, though you can put that under wandering monsters too. Some sort of pack animals that maybe it's just what am I thinking? Like rock hunting grounds or something like that. Like there are big birds that sometimes come out of the sky and like grab cows and fly off with them. So we don't hang out around here very much because there's a big bird that like grabs you and flies off into the sky, never to be seen again. So we don't hang out there. It's very hazardous to your health. Could have meeting places. Oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's sort of the back half, which I realized took a lot longer to talk about than I thought it was going to. Kind of ran on there. So let's talk about mainly the difference. The primary change is that I consolidated the info sign and omens and warnings. Those were technically two different results that I had on the table, and I was like, the more that I do hex mapping with it, the more that I'm like, I need a little bit more flexibility when I'm putting down signs. So I was like, there's really not that much difference between an informational type of signage and some sort of omen or warning. They're all signs at the end of the day. So I was like, it makes more sense to probably combine those into a result. And then that means that I don't have as many hexes that are just like, here's a sign telling you about something else. So I didn't want that as much, so that way there's more actually interesting POIs, points of interest stuff to deal with, and less signage. So I combined those together, and those now operate as number 9, and I replaced the empty spot with number 12, which is roll twice and combine results. So let's, I'm just going to pull out a little dice roller real quick. I'm just going to do it on the side. You guys don't need to see this. And let's say that I want to roll twice and combine results. Let's do a 2d12 roll. And that just gives us a whole bunch of extra options. Give us a little bit more. Take a list, and then if we double that list so it's two next to each other, it gives us exponentially more results. So I rolled a 10 and a 7. So some sort of natural resource that's there, and some sort of meeting place. So the easiest thing for me would be like this is some sort of lock or spring that's notable. Maybe headwaters of some sort of stream or river. It could just be a lake. Could be anything. And those are all water things, but we could do, let's do something that's not water. Let's do something, maybe there's like an old growth forest or something like that. That's a nice natural resource that's used for lumber. And there's a meeting place in the middle of that. Maybe there's like a giant tree that's been chopped off and they meet on top of the big stump of it. We're talking like fantasy style huge tree, and so there's a meeting spot on top of it where people come together to discuss important matters. It's an area like that, and so that immediately kind of gives you an idea instead of just having a meeting place and being like, oh well, there's a place where people come to meet to talk about legal proceedings or to send out punishments or do some sort of rituals or rites, and having just a forest that you cut down for trees, or having a mill there or something like that. You can kind of combine them together to make this extra version of both those things wrapped together. A hazard I want to use. It's below where the giant birds are. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you you wander into the area where the giant birds live, and then you get one of the PCs gets picked up and thrown into the roost, and you immediately have a little mini adventure where they're trying to climb up into the roost and they have to fight the birds, and maybe there's some baby birds that the the solo person up there kind of has to hold off while they're doing that, while the mama bird's away, and then as everybody gets up there, maybe the mama bird comes back, and you have a little fight there with a big bird in the nest at the top of this crag or tor or whatever it is they made their nest in. This is definitely, yeah. I mean, that's a great point of interest to have some sort of little adventure thing going on. So those are the major changes that I made. I basically just pushed 2 together, and then I moved. I added this roll twice and combine results. But we can also do that for a d20. So let's just do an example for the d20 real quick. Okay, I rolled a 1 and a 20. So, alright. So settlement. So there's some sort of city or village here. And a hazard. So we might have a hazardous village. Maybe it's built in a poisonous swamp or something like that. That could be interesting. Or maybe it's you could do something fun. Maybe it's like a Sleeping Beauty situation where you have this sleepy idyllic hamlet that's out in the middle of nowhere, but it's just been absolutely covered over by these poisonous brambles or briar that are around it that grow through the homes, out the windows, through the doors and stuff, and maybe everybody inside's all asleep and because they've been pricked by these things, and maybe instead of poisoning you, it maybe cast sleep on you. But if you have an elf in your party, people who are immune to sleep, then they're able to get in there and check things out and ensure that not the entire party falls asleep, because they're going to be immune to it. Oh, you were talking about bird poop. That would also be funny. Yeah, just having, as a hazard, just having a giant bird poop on you. Though then that might be a killing blow from enough of an elevation. If there's enough height, that poop reaches terminal velocity and just one-shots a character. A bayou raft surrounded by gators. Yeah, a raft city surrounded by gators. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe like the Rite of Thorns in the Druid Village in BG3. Yeah, something like that. Or curses instead. Yes, absolutely. Going with all of that. So when you start throwing things together, it's going to give you a lot of ammunition for your imagination and trying to figure out how those things go together. Another way you might do it is the settlement might actually be growing that as protection. Maybe they're just areas surrounded by this sleepy briar, except for like a fortified gatehouse or something like that. And so they're always out there pruning it and things like that. You need the tables because my imagination would run me otherwise. I mean, there's nothing wrong. If you have the imagination, go with it. That's what I say. It's like these are here as aids to help me with imagination. Because I find myself, personally, is that I will also oftentimes try to make it super, super mundane. Which I think adds a lot of that verisimilitude, adds a lot of a very grounded world, but also kind of punches down a little bit on the fantasy aspect. So sometimes having the tables be like, oh, right, and then make it fantasy. Because sometimes I'll just be like, oh, well, it's just a normal thing. It's just a village. Okay, well, how's that village fantasy? Oh, well, if there's sleep-inducing briars in or through it or around it, then yeah, that's pretty fantastical. We can go with that. So yeah, those are the big changes. Let's just, because we didn't go through 1 through 12, let's just do it. Or for anybody who's seeing this stuff for the first time, you'll know it. So 1, settlement. That's going to be, the size of the settlement is dependent on the scale of the hex that I'm working with. I do this nested hex system that goes from local hexes, which are about a league across, so about an hour's walk across, all the way up to Atlas hexes, which are about 360 nautical miles, which is about 6 degrees of latitude and longitude, so they're huge. So they scale down, so an Atlas hex has 32? No. Is that right? 32? Hexes, region-sized hexes inside of it. They have county hexes inside of it, and the county hexes have local hexes inside of it, which are those league hexes in part. And those scale with the tiers of adventure. So you're dealing with local hexes 1 through 4 levels. dealing with county hexes, 5 through 10 levels. You're dealing with region hexes, stuff that shows up there in your 11 to 16 levels, and then 17 plus you're dealing specifically with Atlas hexes. It's when you're, jumping all the way across the world and dealing with stuff like that. Spending a lot of extra planar time, etc. So, in the local hex, a settlement's usually a hamlet. It's got like 50 to 400 people in it, so it's not particularly big settlement. And then any sort of point of interest that shows up at one of those higher level hexes is, of course, makes its way down to a lower level hex. So you might have a settlement in a local hex that is still like a massive capital city. It's still huge. But in general, if you're rolling at that scale, you're going to end up with mainly little hamlets. And the same thing is very true for number 2, which is holdings and fortifications. So these are where your castles are, these are where your manor houses are, peel towers, any sort of fortified area in which a noble typically lives. But it could also be like a fighting order, or sometimes you'll have religious folk who are living there as well, rather than something like a temple. They can be living there because they might be this is usually whoever's in charge of the land, whoever's in governance over this area is usually going to be here. As well as little knights with their own holdings and lords with their own little holdings, who are vassals to some other higher up noble that's higher up in the food chain. And after that is a religious site. So religious sites is probably the biggest list that I have. In fact, let's just jump over, just to show it off. Move over here. Show me this. Let's go to our, because I was just working on this. So I'm in the process of redoing all of this, but just for the sake of ease, we can look at this one. So religious site is usually the one with the most amount of sub-rolling on it, or sub-roll ideas, because there's a lot of places that are just religious in nature. So it could be a burial mound, a crypt, a mausoleum, a pyramid, a tomb, a burial ground, a charnel house, an ossuary, a potter's field, a chantry, a hermitage, an almshouse, a hospital, an orphanage, or a school, a cloister, or a commune, which includes abbeys, convents, monasteries, and priories, as well as other things, nunneries, etc. Isolated grave, cairn, or kist, a repository, which just means that it holds something of value. Usually that's a library, an oracle, some sort of reliquary or artifact, as a pagoda or stupa, or a scriptorium, which is a library just for scrolls and making more of it. It's also for copying. Then we have pilgrims' rests, or hospitals, but hospital in like the medieval sense. Like, this is a place where pilgrims stay. It's kind of like an inn. Usually it's relatively free. I think it's usually free for the faithful traveling. It also is the reason that we have the Knights Hospitalier. They're based off of that hospital aspect, because they were in charge of trying to keep pilgrims safe on their journey to the Holy Land. That was supposed to be what their order does. So that's actually where we get the hospital term from. And then that just kind of morphed over time into being like, that's where we treat sick people. Could be some sort of sacred site, historical site, a miracle site, or has some sort of sacred natural resource there, like it has some sort of healing spring water that's there. Something of that nature. Then that we kind of get down into just the nitty-gritty basics. There's a shrine or a chapel here. There's a temple or a church here. And then there's some sort of wayside altar. I spelled altar wrong. Altar is spelled with an A. There we go. Some sort of prayer stone or prayer tree that maybe has like ribbons hanging in it or stuff. Or some sort of totem or symbol. Like, the things that always make me think of this is like, if you have ever seen pictures of the Japanese countryside where they have the little Buddhist statues, that usually they have like little handkerchiefs tied around them, keep them warm and things like that. That makes me think that like this is something that you walk across on while you're walking. a place where to stop to sort of pray or to be mindful, something of that nature. And I have a problem where I want everything to be the expression of the stuff I know is happening in the background. Oh yeah, so you're just like trying to fire hose the players with like everything's happening. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I struggle with that too, yeah, because sometimes I'm like, there's always stuff going on. Sometimes I feel like it's really difficult for players because they're not sure. When you feed them too much information, they don't know what they should focus on. They get a little analysis paralysis about being like, there's so many adventure hooks, which one do I choose? And the answer is any of them. I mean, that's what I usually want to communicate as a dungeon master, is like, any of them. These are all of equal importance. Choose whatever you want, whatever sounds fun to you as a player. And what makes the most sense for you as your player character, your character in the world to be interested in dealing with. You want to stock it with a lot of stuff in advance, populate it, then roll to represent what happens to it. Frequency of that isn't something I know what to do with. Yeah, that's a lot of rolling in between sessions, if you're going to do that for like every single hex. It also depends, I guess, on the scale of your hexes. If you're using something like a 6 mile hex, that's significantly fewer hexes than I typically use. Yeah, I guess I would focus more on doing things like faction turns. And have the factions themselves drive change. And then pick the hex that makes the most sense for them to be augmenting. Yeah, you like the subtables. Some of those religious sites I wouldn't have considered at all. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I have those in there and why I use the term site. Because usually with a religious site, I'd be like, the default would be like, oh, there's a temple here. But then you just have a bunch of temples. And it's like, but there's actually tons of other sort of religious areas. There's, right, you have the Weeping Wall in the Holy Land, like that's its own thing. And that's just a site, right? That's just a sacred site in here. That's all that is. That's a sacred site. Some sort of repository, so a reliquary where they hold saints' bones, or there's an entombed saint there, or, you know, a part of the cross, etc. I'm pulling from a lot of specifically Crusades period, because that is sort of the area that we kind of live in for D&D fantasy, is that sort of Western, medieval-ish, Renaissance-ish kind of anachronistic time period. That's usually where we live. So I'm drawing a lot of examples from that specifically. And then a scriptorium where they're copying books and illuminating manuscripts and doing that sort of thing. And then I also wanted to throw in some stuff that was like an ancient Greek sort of oracle. This could also be, a repository could also be, actually, that might not make sense. You could use a repository as that. Sort of like an Islam House of Learning kind of aspect. Though that kind of falls into temple, so they're kind of, you know, you do whatever you think makes sense. Yeah, engagement and then retention is so much more important than representing my background in this. Yeah. Yeah. Because, right, if you're just one playing, you can play your own sort of weird little solo faction game, but assuming that you want to play a game with other people, we have to focus on what the other people are doing at the table, and they don't know everything else that's going on. And then you have to consider, is that even important for me to be doing in the background, or should I be spending my prep time focusing on things that they're going to actually encounter? So I try to focus my prep specifically on things that I know they're going to come up against, because I try to end each session being like, okay, what are you guys doing next? Where are you going? What are you doing if it's unclear? And so they make a decision, and then I know what to prep. If they're like, oh, well, we're going to go check out that treasure room. Like, that's our primary thing that we want to do. Okay, great. Now I know what to prep for the next session. Making wandering monsters their own collective faction. See, I represent wandering monsters usually differently, even though I have a wandering monster thing on here, on the table. Let's go back to the table. Even though I have a wandering monster aspect on here, that's not the only wandering monsters they're ever going to come across, because that's almost no wandering monsters whatsoever. So I represent wandering monsters as a normal wandering monster roll as they're traveling across from hex to hex. You go to a new hex, you roll for an encounter of some sort of monster. Might be more humanoids, might be travelers, might be hobgoblins. We won't know until you roll the die. So I represent it as that, rather than having them be their own sort of faction, because they're not allied in any sort of way. They're just a thing that kind of happens. You know, if they care about the region or their side winning, then it's in their best interest to care. They need to be dialed in first. Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you're bringing them in as sort of those agents of the crown idea, you want to strongly align them in that way. Yeah, to care about the region or their side winning. NPCs are usually the easiest way to do that. Give them a base and give them NPCs to care about. Yeah, on arrival or on time passing, yeah. So yeah, what I represent is every few hours, which kind of loosey-goosey exploration turn for me, which is that either you're traveling across the hex to hex, or you're still in the hex and you're doing things in the hex, and if you're in that hex doing things in the hex, then yeah, you roll for another encounter roll, if you spend more time there. And then I also do a constitution roll to be like, this is the amount, rather than tracking hours in the day, I track instead how much energy you expend while you're doing stuff. Because sometimes you just get tired and it's still only like 2 in the afternoon, but you're dog tired and you're like, I can't adventure anymore. So we're going to find a place to make camp, or you try to push yourselves even though you're tired. It's that whole thing. That's a whole separate kettle of fish that we're not going to get into now. That's its own thing. But yeah, that's religious sites and travel havens. So these usually come with a settlement attached to them. As you can see, the holding fortifications, usually everything up here in these first 6 usually come with a settlement attached to them, in general. One being a settlement. So the religious site, if we had, let's say a graveyard, well, you gotta have people to put in the graveyard, some bodies put in the graveyard. So there's a little hamlet or something next to it. But really, the thing is more notable about this location is the graveyard itself, because maybe there's a very specific person who's buried there, or a specific line of people who are buried there, or more specifically, who's not buried there. Maybe that's the interest. It's like, oh, well, there was this person who lived there all their life, but they were never buried here, and maybe that's the adventure point. Or maybe they have been, man, what's the term? I cannot remember the term off the top of my head. When they remove you from the ground. They took the body out of the ground. Exhumed. Yeah, they exhumed the body, and it's somewhere else. And maybe that's the whole thing. Or somebody's dug it up and robbed it, or there's just ghouls in the graveyard. It can be any sort of thing. As to why it's an actual point of interest for adventurers. And then we have travel havens next. These are our roadside inns, caravanserai, which is just a fancy word for a place where caravans stop. Other, like a survival shelter, like maybe you find a cabin in the woods, a hunting lodge, somebody's made a lean-to and left it, or it can also be a cache of supplies. So you might find like a place where maybe some of the local peasants actually steal part of the harvest and have buried it somewhere, or have it in the woods somewhere, so the Lord doesn't get it. Something like that you can stumble across and be like, oh, here's actually just extra food for us, if we can just take some of this. Or some other sort of survival thing. It might be a cache of weapons that got left behind or something like that. Very much sort of like as we were talking about earlier, the finding mythical swords in troll caves. Well, there's a whole bunch of elf stuff in this troll cave. that's weird. I don't know why they stashed it here, but they stashed their cache of war supplies here. And that's what's left. There's some gold in here and a bunch of armor and some weapons. Clearly they meant to come back here for it, and that never happened. Oh, you gotta go? Yeah, take it easy. We'll see you later. So yeah, that's travel havens. And then crossings. These are primarily water crossings, but there also can be land crossings or elevation crossings. So it could be a mountain pass, a ferry, a ford, a bridge, something like that. And I use this usually when I make a crossing on the hex path that keys me in that there's water, that there's running water there, and then I can stretch out. Okay, well if it's here, where does that river go? And I can map that out, knowing that there's a crossing there. Yeah, yeah. The elves of Gonlin didn't come back because they died. Yeah, well, yeah, in that specific example, yes, because they're dead. That's why they're not back. But it could be just the living. Maybe that's where the locals keep some war supplies. Maybe there are rebels in the area. Maybe there's maybe you walked up to a Robin Hood type of encampment and they're gone. They're out robbing the highways. And so you're like, oh, there's a bunch of stuff here. We could just take this stuff because they didn't leave anybody behind because they thought this was a hidden place. So you grab a bunch of their stuff and head out, and maybe you run into them later, or they realize it's you who stole it, and there's a whole nother adventure plot thread for you to follow. So, and that's the way I like this system, is that I just create stuff, and then however the players end up interacting with it just spins off plot threads so easily. Adventure hooks. Easy ways to be like, oh, and here's the situation. But you could also put that Robin Hood one into this next one, which would be a creature lair. So I put creature lair instead of monster. I told you with that wandering monster, because sometimes I feel like when you use the term monster, it kind of assumes there's going to be a fight, like combat's what you're going to be doing, but not always. So creature lair kind of leaves it a little bit ambiguous. And then on this one I have a question mark on the settlement, so there may or may not be a settlement there. And that'll be usually determined by whatever monster's in the lair. So if I roll up a random thing and let's say it's a bandit captain. Okay, well maybe the bandit captain is in charge. They're their own little robber baron who's lording themselves over this little town. This little hamlet that's in need. And so now they have this tyrant who's taking up, who's lording over them. Or maybe not. Maybe there's not a settlement, or maybe there used to be a settlement, but everybody's kind of run away from it. They've all flooded at this point. So it kind of goes either way. So 7 is meeting place. We kind of talked about meeting places earlier, but I'm just going to pull up my notes real quick. Just kind of go over. Did we go over meeting places? Did we not go over meeting places? I'm a little discombobulated because I've been looking at this thing because I've been working on this update, the other portion of it with all the other stuff that was in it, for a while now. So crossing my streams on what I've talked about and what I haven't, because I've looked at all this stuff a lot over the last few days. No, I did not. So the first one is Tribal Moot. This is a place where people come to meet. Could be hill folk, maybe not. Trading post or crossroads market. So that tells me that there's probably a road here, and then I can figure out where those roads go. The edges of those roads go. And if it's crossroads, well, where 2 different roads go. A fair or holiday grounds. So this is a place where people show up a few times a year to have a big like maypole spring festivals, big like county fairs, things like that. That just need a big open space. So there may be people there, there may not be there. Some sort of neutral ground. That's for the hill folk or monster meeting place. So if you have a unantagonistic monster, you can maybe find them here and talk to them. It's like a defined area where people come to talk to those sorts of monsters. So if there were maybe there are some peaceful orcs in your setting, and so you're like, okay, well, the local lords come to this place to talk to the orcs because it's kind of a neutral ground spot between their lands. We have a sanctuary or free space, so this is like a greens. This is where commons ground, where maybe there are a bunch of sheep that they're pasturing or something of that nature. It's just kind of open ground, and somebody might not have legal claim over it because it's a free ground. So it might also be a sanctuary, so people who are being chased by the law might go to seek sanctuary, so you can spin that back up and put it more of a religious site, like, oh, this is actually religious ground in the old sanctuary kind of aspect. It's like, oh, well, you can't take me as long as I'm on declared sanctuary within these religious grounds. It's like, all right, but if you ever leave, they're going to nab you. But it also kind of gives people a safe haven to run to as well. That's not the safe havens that we talked about, which are generally just places you can sleep and not have to worry about getting attacked. Generally. There's still thieves in the world. Depending on how much wealth you have on your shoulders and how desperate the people are around you as to whether maybe that's going to be safe or not. And the last one I have on here is just a watering hole. And that's just a place where people and animals take water. So it could be a place where baggage trains or wagon trains stop to get water for their horses or oxen. It could be a place where we feel like that very sort of archetypal, like Serengeti shot where you have all the animals that come to this watering hole to drink water, and then inevitably there's always a crocodile that jumps out and tries to grab like an antelope or something and pull it into the water. So that can also be a meeting place. Doesn't always meet for people. Isolated homesteads. These are people who live off by themselves. Usually they're hermits or outlaws or former adventurers, neutral monsters that have given up their life of being dastardly monsters. These are just people who are kind of off by themselves, and all the quirks that kind of come with talking with these people. They could be that crazy prospector in the hills. That can be in the isolated homestead who swears there's gold in these hills. That can be somebody who's out there on an isolated homestead. Just as easily as let's say a ranger that's retired and they're just living in a cabin in the woods somewhere. Just enjoying the isolation because they're so used to it. But can be called upon for information or even assistance sometimes. Maybe you can go hire them, depending on what level they are. Maybe they'll come assist you. As long as you stay in their area, like they're not going to follow you halfway across the world, probably. But if you're like, hey, we got to deal with this thing that's pretty nearby, can you aid us if we give you some coin? Yeah, sure. And they'll dust off their weapons and armor and get to it. So I'm going to take a quick break, refill up on my coffee. We'll be right back, and we'll jump back into the one thing that I did change, which was info, signs, omens, and warnings. So we'll deal with that real quick, and we'll jump on from there. So let's do that. I'm going to go fill my coffee. I will be back in just a second. All right. See ya. Alright, let's get back in it. Alright, we dropped off at info, omens, and warning signs, which I don't think I've filled out. Like I said, this is the combined one. I don't think I've gotten down to that yet. No. Pretty sure I have not. I have not. Nope, nope, maybe I have. I lied. I'm lying to myself. Like I said, I've been kind of doing this very piecemeal, so I haven't been doing it in order, which has not been doing me any favors about remembering what I've done and not. So a omen, info, or warning. Oh, these are not supposed to be here. Yeah, okay. So sometimes these kind of cross over a little bit with landmarks, so I'm going to change that a little bit for some of the natural ones. Oh, no. I don't know. Maybe not. Things like this, like monoliths and arches and stela, are very interesting because they're markers in their own right as landmarks, but they're also typically giving some sort of information. So maybe I'll just keep them in both. They're a pretty common thing that shows up, so I guess it makes sense, because these are only going to be those kinds. So yeah, we'll just keep it how it is. I'm fine with that. I'm not going to make myself work any harder than I have to. Be okay with it. Be okay with it. So we're going to go with that. Alright, so an arch, a border stone, or a monolith, or a stela. So these are just things that are just sticking up, generally on the side of the roads. An arch, like the Arch of Triumph, is just, it tells you about something. In that case, it's about the triumph of war. Could also just mark the entrance to the city, or an entrance to somebody's land holdings. Very similar aspect to what a border stone does, which is just a big stone that just sits at the perimeter and lets you know, hey, you're crossing into different lands, or you're crossing out of the protection of the Lord, or whatever it is. Go on, and monoliths, similar thing. Usually they have like code laws and things like that on them. Stela are the same thing but smaller, generally. They also might tell you, which direction goes which on a road. You can also just have a sign. Other things, dams, fountains, spring houses, or a well. Generally give you some sort of information or warning about something. So, warning, generally water. Hey, there's water here. And that is a place where people, in addition to being a notice of itself, it could be a place where people would post other sorts of warnings or information. So it is something like a spring house, which is a house that has like a natural spring inside of it. There could be stuff that's posted on the walls like, hey, you can, any area like that works very naturally as sort of a notice board. And I think works a little bit more diegetically than being like, oh, you walk into the tavern and there's a bulletin board that has like a tear sheet to talk to somebody about an adventure, like seeking adventures for blah blah blah. I like that more naturally as something like a spring house. That's things people just like put stuff on the walls and be like, need help with this, visit Old Man Pickett's farm for more information, or whatever it is. Now, if you don't know where Old Man Pickett's farm is, you're going to have to ask somebody, probably. Because they probably assume that whoever's going to the local spring house probably knows who they are and where they live. You also get some more fantastical results, something like an earth mote, which is sort of if you don't know what an earth mote is, it's a piece of ground that floats in the sky. Something like that, or a meteorite. So you could have a big like crater with a meteorite in it. And that might be a warning to not go there, or that weird stuff is afoot in the area. Both of those would be like, in my specific homebrew world setting, these would be things that tell you stuff like, hey, there's chaos magic here. Chaos magic's usually not good, so you can go here, but it might also do something real weird to you. So keep that in mind. We have down here we have gibbets, a hanging tree, oubliette, Nothing that's got prisoners in it, so warnings of not to break the law. They have people hanging on a tree or crucified by the side of the road or in a gibbet. The gibbet always makes me think of for those of you who grew up around the time that I did, this probably is more of a cultural cornerstone for you, but the movie Willow, and the first time that we meet Mad Mardigan, he's in a gibbet. They're talking and convincing them to let him out of it. So that's its own sort of baked in nice thing. Well, you might come across this person, they might still be alive and you can talk to them. Or they might be dead and they might just have the sign that's hanging around their neck that says thief and they're just hanging from a tree. Or have their hands cut off and crucified or whatever. However they're punished for that. You also come across megaliths, cromlechs, dolmens, menhirs, and orthostats, which are fancy things. You don't need to know where those things are. I know what most of those are. Not all of them. But if you've seen Stonehenge, that's... yeah. Things like that. Big standing rocks and things of that nature. That are generally ancient, and you're like, we don't know what these are. But I'll also go into that. There's also stuff that should be on here that's not on here. I noticed that I don't have... They should be on here. I think I ported this over, but I haven't done any work on it yet. That's the issue. But it should also have some other stuff in here. It should have... let's look it up. Yeah, it doesn't have some of the stuff. I have clearly not worked on this yet. So this is not actually super useful for us to look at. But we can look at it. Because, yeah, this shouldn't be... Some of these are kind of wonky. Let me read off the other list, because that's going to be more helpful for us, I feel like. Oh, that's what I'm trying to do. There we go. Go back to this page. For our info moments. So, I'm just going to read the two tables used to be right next to each other, so I'll just read what was onto this. Signal station. That could be like a fire signal, a horn, some sort of mirror signaling or flag signaling, a watchtower or minaret, a checkpoint or messenger station, a lighthouse or cairn, a grave marker, a directional signage of some type, classic, like this way to whatever place. And then boundary stones or notice, code law stone, obelisk, column, arch, we talked about those. A notice board or warning sign or symbol, like, hey, danger here. Or the classic, you see the adventurers going through the dark jungle, and there's a stick with a human head on it that's got some ritual writing on it that they probably can't read. And you're like, oh, well, that's clearly a warning to stay out, because that's a human skull facing us from obviously a dead person. So if we go that way, the people may try to kill us. So you have that. Yeah, because this has some of the other stuff on it. A criminal's corpse, an effigy or superstitious tiding, some sort of omen that happens. Maybe there's a murder of crows or some other thing like that. Superstitious tiding, I like thinking about... if you play the Curse of Strahd adventure, where everybody kind of has their fortune in the Taroka deck, and that's related to something that's going on, and then seeing it like the Hanged Man is like that, stuff like that, having those sort of superstitious tidings, foreshadowing something that's coming. Astrological construction, those are like geoglyphs or petroglyphs. Geoglyphs and petroglyphs, right? Those are the things. Where either they are, you have like cave paintings, stuff that's been carved or painted onto the sides of hills and mountains and cliffs, faces and stuff like that, generally ancient but not always. And then those sort of giant geological constructions like the Nazca constructions, where they're like, oh, this is a weird bird, but it's a huge bird that should be shown that you can see from like space. Why did they build this? Who are they showing it off to? I mean, probably gods, right? That kind of makes most sense. Or aliens, if you're among those theorists. Those sorts of areas. So, and then at the bottom I have monuments, totems, or menhirs. Yeah, so like a totem pole, some sort of monument, menhir, just a big old rock, like we talked about. So those are those. If I was warning, so it makes sense why I kind of pulled those together because they are very similar. One just gave information, and the other gave sort of more specific omens or warnings. And then I was like, yeah, it just kind of makes more sense to kind of throw those all together. In my case, I felt like, and that gives me a lot more flexibility that when they come up, it's not just another signpost. I can be like, oh, well, this is a crucified person, or Stela, or whatever it is. It just gives me a little bit more flexibility for options there, and then I could combine some of those things or separate them as I wanted to. You know, we can get kind of weird with it if we want to. And natural resources. Natural resources are, I mean, you probably understand what these are. They're a place of abundant resource that people are maybe utilizing or would utilize if they knew it existed. So, I'll just run down the things real quick because they're really basic or simple. So really I want to know if it's common, rare, or exotic resource. If it's common resource, could be just a water spring. Again, there's a lot of info in here where it's just like, yeah, there's just water here, and that's useful. It could be, these are where the blackberry bushes are in the forest. Okay, got it. It could be a good spot to fish. Those are all super common stuff when, if you think about sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So anything common is like a day-to-day thing that they might need. Whereas anything that's rare might be something that's worth exporting at some point, or being used to make something else. So lumber, having some sort of milling or logging or lumber industry is very common, as well as something like a mine or quarry. It could be an iron mine or like a limestone quarry or something of that nature. And then something that's more exotic, which is a fancy resource. So it could be a gold mine, or a place to pan for gold, or maybe this is where silkworms are. Maybe there's a farm for silkworms, and this is a place where they make silk. Because you can also determine, one of the roles on it is this a permanent operation? So that would include something like an aqueduct. So it could be actually just the movement of water from some sort of settlement from some sort of mountain area. I mean, that it could be a permanent operation. Would also be something like a plantation or a mine or a quarry, something that's used full time. There are always people here. Or aqueduct, there's not always people there, but it's artificial in nature. Put it that way. It is always in operation. There's a semi-permanent operation. That's usually like a work camp. So this might be, so if we were doing lumber, so this is a place where they're just a bunch of lumberjacks there chopping down trees, and then they're going to move on once they're done here. And so they have kind of a work camp because they've been here for they're bivouacked up because they're here for a few weeks, maybe, or maybe they only do it every few times in the year. Maybe they come out here to like coppice trees or whatever. Do that. A gathering spot, which is a spontaneous operation, that would be something like the blackberry bushes I was talking about. Where it's like, yeah, they're not being grown specifically, but every once in a while people come out and just get blackberries from them whenever they're in season. And then in the end, there's some sort of unworked or undiscovered, a absolutely pristine resource, which means that if the player characters or party run across it, they are probably the first people to run across it who know it's in this area. Which is great for them. So especially if you want to lean into something like the bastion rules and be like, ooh, this would be a good place for us to maybe set up a bastion. Forget, if we were going to become landowners or have rights to land, this would be a good spot for it, where we could build a little manor house, and maybe we could have those blackberry bushes, I guess, or if we would do something else. Like if we knew there was gold in the stream nearby, we would be like, well, we want to stake a claim and do something like that. And in their downtime, they could pan for gold if they wanted to. So try to spill my coffee everywhere. Great job, me. Great job, me. That's alright. Yeah, just a little bit. It'll be fine. So yeah, that's a natural resource. Construction. So these are one of the cool ones. So ruins and construction. I didn't talk about it with ruins. So ruins, you roll a d12. It's going to be the same process though. With ruins, you just roll a d12. With construction, you roll a d10. So we have a construction. So let's say we're going to roll a construction. Okay, something is in the process of being built or is being repaired. What is it? I rolled a 7. A meeting place. Okay, they're building a meeting place. Maybe it's a little chapter house. It could be, like we said, the example we used with that big stump. So maybe they're cutting down that massive tree at this point, and they're working on that. Maybe that's what they're doing. Or they're repairing. Let's do another one. They could be repairing something. What are they repairing? All right, they rolled the same thing. Let's roll something different. 4, Travel Haven. They are repairing an inn. Maybe an inn has been partially burned down. They're repairing it. And I might roll a D hundo just to see how far it's going. 15%. This thing burned basically all the way down to the ground. There's basically only the foundation left, so they're just now kind of setting up the studs for the walls and working on the framing. They're still working on the framing of the inn. So this place is burned all the way to the ground. Player characters come up, they talk to people, they've maybe learned about what burned the inn down, how they got burned down. Is that an adventure? Maybe. Was it arson? Did somebody burn it down on purpose? Are the people who own the inn, are they still alive? Did they die in the fire? Is the inn up for sale? Maybe the player characters want their, like you said, they want their own little bastion. Maybe they can pool their gold pieces together and see if they can buy it out from whoever's repairing it. Maybe. So lots of evocative, just adventure things they can interact with. So what we're trying to build with, or at least that's what I try to do when I'm building a hex map. Like here's a lot of interesting stuff that's going on that you can decide to engage with or not. It's very player driven. It's like, do you want to run an inn? Is that the adventure that you want to play? I mean, I'd like to know that beforehand because I built a whole bunch of like DnDAdventure stuff. But hey, if you want to play a super cozy Stardew Valley style game where you're just working an inn, you're putting it back together and working it and keeping it safe, yeah, we can play that game too. Just we gotta make sure everybody's on the same page with that. That's what we're gonna do. Everybody wants to play that kind of game. So yeah, that's the construction. You figure out how much the construction has gone by, if it's a new construction or a repair, and then I roll to see how far along it is. And then if they decide to interact with it, I can figure out why they're doing the construction or anything like that. Very good. Super simple. And then you can always... The nice thing about the tables, so the tables, the way that I talk about tables, using tables of this nature, is that they are the tool. So if you have a good idea, you should just run with the good idea. If you have something that comes to mind, just go with the idea. So one of the things that often comes to mind for me when I roll a construction is road construction. Probably because in my real life that's the most common construction I run across is road construction in my daily life. So it's like, all right, well, they're building a road from where to where? And that gives me an idea. Okay, from this area to this area, so now I know a road passes through here. Interesting. Do that. Roll twice, combine results we already talked about. You roll twice and you combine the results. But let's do a ruin. So what does a ruin look like? So we roll a d12 for the ruin. It's very interesting. So, and I rolled the complicated example first, so I'm going to roll a second time, and then we'll do that. 1. Okay, so a ruin of a settlement or a city. You come across a city that's been abandoned. Maybe it's like a ghost town. Maybe everything seems fine, but it's just dilapidated, like it's falling apart, like people have moved on. Maybe it's a Roanoke, Croatoan situation where people were living here, then the crops were real bad and everybody was starving, and then people showed up to that place and there's nobody here anymore. And we don't know where they went and what happened to them. Maybe that situation, maybe it burned down, maybe it got attacked. Maybe they rebelled against the Lord and they were put to the sword. But assuming that it's a settlement in which there are usually fields, and usually people who are working there, anybody who's in charge of this area probably wants people here and working here, and tilling the land, generally. So if that is the case, why is it not happening? Well, now you go talk to the local lord. If you don't know where the local lord is, alright, you explore a little bit more, you find out where the local lord's keep is. They're holding a fortification. You talk to them and be like, hey, what's going on with that burned down village back there? Like, is that something you need help with? They're like, yes, we know that there are. And I use a lot of very common examples. Let's try to do something a little bit less common. Trying to think of good low-level monsters. Oh yeah. No, that place is infested with the undead. Like, oh crap, we didn't see any undead. It's like, oh well, were you there during the day? Yeah. Okay, well the undead primarily come out and mill about at night. But, you know, obviously people don't want to live there because, you know, there's zombies and ghouls and maybe ghosts or banshees or specters or shadows or all sorts of weird stuff that happens there. Oh, well, we're just the sort of people who can go in and adventure and get that taken care of for you. For a little gold, a little recompense. Filthy lucre. And then we'll do the complicated example. Now, the complicated example is that I was rolling for Ruin on a D12 and I got an 11. So that means I got a Ruin of a construction. Alright, so it's a ruined construction of what? I'm going to roll a D10. 9. Okay, some sort of info warning sign. So just for fun, I'm going to roll on the actual table in front of me, which has... 7. So it kind of nests, so you can roll a number of different tables together and kind of gives you a very specific idea of what's going on. I rolled a 7. So that's a boundary notice or stone. Yeah, so there's clearly like some masonry tools laying about. They've moved this big stone into a divot that they've made like sort of a foundation for, and they've rolled it into there. And there's a bunch of mason's tools around, and maybe it's like in high grass, so this has been here for like this way for a little bit. And I'll just roll a little hundo. How far along are they? They're about 70% done with it. So they've only got a little bit left, but then something happened to the person who was working on this, or people who were working on it, and it hasn't been completed yet. So it's the ruin of a construction of an informational sign. So they might be like, oh, if it's tall grass, then this wasn't a recent thing, but also nobody's come and picked up these tools, so maybe not a lot of people pass by here, or the area is known to be dangerous right now, so people haven't been here. Maybe you start rolling for an ambush. Does somebody jump out and grab them? Do they find remains of whoever was left here? Were they killed here, or did they run off? And now it becomes a little investigation for them to check out and figure out what that is. And I'll kind of do it on the fly, kind of improv that and be like, okay. And kind of depend on how long we've been going in the session, or whether I want it to be like a bigger thing, or maybe I want it to be like a super small thing. And maybe it's just a little ambush. It just happened recently. They track into the nearby copse of trees, and they find the remains, the very bloody remains of a mason who has just been killed freshly. Medicine check, maybe a couple of days, and they see that the gnawed bone marks. So it's like clearly there's some sort of animal in the area, and we've determined, oh, it's a pack. Oh no, there's an owlbear in these woods. Do you want to hunt the owlbear, yes or no? If you decide to make camp there, is the owlbear going to attack your camp? Almost certainly. This is D&D after all. Now, in reality, would it probably attack your camp? No, but we're playing a fantasy game and you're like, hey, there's something dangerous in the area. Well, anyways, time to go to bed. That thing's definitely going to attack you. It's almost assuredly going to attack your camp in the night. Especially maybe it's the owl part of the owlbear, is the eyes and the head, so I'm going to assume that they are nocturnal and have exceptionally good eyesight. So then that spins off into its own thing. Super easy, very easy to put together. And like I said, we already did the roll twice and combine results. So you could end up rolling doubles. So what happens if you roll doubles? So if you roll a double, you can either roll again if you want to, or I think it's the extra version of whatever I rolled. Let's say I rolled two doubles, two double twos, so holding or fortification, what I might do is that on the list I might roll twice and take the higher result, which would be a 5, which means that would be a keep with a bailey and an outer bailey with towers and a moat. So it's a well fortified castle. So I try to like make it a little extra. Like the only thing it's missing is a gatehouse. Which, you know, maybe if I rolled something else, they're in the process of constructing, or is repairing, or is in ruins, or... Again, it's very easy to throw these together to make a bigger whole than some of its parts. That's it. We went through this. That took significantly longer than I thought it would, as it usually does. So I have probably overplanned for this stream, now that we are approaching hour number 2. So let's see if we can run through the next part real fast. Which is Weregild, which shouldn't take us long. Weregild is a pretty easy concept. Okay, so what is Weregild, if you're not familiar with that term? So it's basically a fine for murdering somebody. It is a somewhat, I guess, medieval-ish, more of an Iron Age thing, I think, really, than medieval-ish, but whatever, we're here. And it just does what it says on the tin, so I'll just read this off because I've pretty much finished this sheet. So, Weregild murder fines. To avoid cycles of violence and things like blood feuds after someone's killed, Weregild, which is literally translates as man price, was put into place. If you kill somebody, you have to pay their surviving family and kin a set amount of gold based on essentially their caste, their societal role. This base amount is often modified by the deceased's age/ability, their gender, and societal function and occupation. So depending, if you want to use gender, that's fine. If you don't want to use gender, that's perfectly fine too. It is a fantasy world after all. We have plenty of not dudes doing adventurous stuff and holding jobs. It's fine. Do whatever you want. I'm just giving the context for that. I actually didn't even put that in the roll table. You could if you wanted to. I assume they would treat that very much like, probably like child age. So, then there's any legal or regional customs, so this would vary. This isn't usually like a super ironclad thing. But this is super useful. What I find Weregild to be the most useful for is trying to give consequences for doing stuff like being a murder hobo. So you go in there, you kill somebody because you have an argument with somebody. One of the player characters pulls a knife and stabs somebody and kills somebody. They're like, okay, well, you killed somebody. There's lots of witnesses that you did this. Because they're in town or something. Being the murder hobo thing that they do. Or they've done some other crime, and you can use this for other crimes as well. So generally, Weregild is somewhere between 3 to 10 years of what the deceased's earnings or productivity would be. And a sizable amount made it a strong deterrent against killing another person. It also created something kind of like the progenitor of life insurance, in which, hey, you have somebody in your family who dies, and then you get a payment for that. Because you've lost their productivity for your, family unit. So, I did a little noodling. And with a little noodling and cross-referencing some historical example of Weregild, holidays and non-working days in a medieval-ish kind of time period, and D&D 5e/2024's lifestyle expenses, we get the below table that you can use for your D&D game, if you are interested in doing this. So, we set up a few different things. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different levels of base payouts that you do for Weregild. So let's say they got into a tavern brawl and they killed somebody. Okay. Was that person a charitable folk? Probably not if they were inside like a tavern or an inn. So probably not an addict or a drunkard or a beggar or some other sort of infirm person who basically subsists almost entirely upon charity of other people. So you do something like that, their life is only worth about less than 20 gold a year, unfortunately. Because again, they're not a productive member of society or whatever. Alright, and above that we have impoverished people, so that would be serfs, slaves, indentured folk, people who are living in like city slums, things of that nature, who are kind of at the very lowest rung of society. Not quite like the untouchable level, but like they're like right there. And so they're about 20 gold a year. So anything less than that, you're addicts and beggars and drunkards and infirmed or elderly. Well, elderly is his own thing. But other people who rely on charity, probably somebody who's got some sort of chronic injury or something that keeps them from being able to work. They got the Lumbago, Red Dead Redemption. Then you have your free and unskilled laborers. These are your basic commoner. That's about 40 gold a year. You pay. You kill this person, you gotta pay 40 gold to their surviving kin. They don't have any surviving kin. Hey baby, that's going to the king. Ooh, tax money. Love it. Find. So, above that you have your common goods artisans, so the people like your smiths, farriers, things like that. They make very mundane stuff, carpenters, etc. They're worth about 200 gold a year in their price, so you gotta pay that out. A common goods merchant or rare goods artisan, so a step level up, 400 gold a year. A rare goods merchant or an exotic goods artisan, minor clergy or minor nobility, talking about 800 gold a year. And exotic goods merchants, major clergy and nobles, about 2,000 gold a year. So let's say we talked about having a tavern brawl, things get out of hand, somebody gets stabbed. The likelihood is that that person is probably going to be somewhere in this range. If this is just a random, probably a smaller hamlet, so let's just say that they're probably going to be just a regular old commoner. We don't want to think too much about this. Regular old commoner, 40 gold a year. Alright, so Weregild is about 3 to 10 years. So in the examples, I assumed about 5 years, just a kind of middle of the road example. So, it's 200 gold. And we multiply that by 5. So you're going to have to pay 1,000 gold just for killing the commoner. Do you have 1,000 gold? I clearly did not finish out this chart because that is absolutely wrong. You should be more. I'm going to have to go back and fix this. Actually, I could do it right now. No, that's right. So you're going to have to pay, you kill a commoner, you have to pay 200 gold. Because they're 40 gold a year. Alright, now I usually run a pretty cash poor game. So your results may vary. So, but in a cash poor game that like something that I run, 200 gold is a lot of money. And player characters usually don't have that kind of money just hanging out, especially at lower levels. Just in the old coin purse, their hip. So, what happens if you can't pay the Weregild? Well, you're going to have to convince somebody else to pay it for you, or to take that on, or you're going to become indentured yourself. Or they'll kill you. Assuming that this is to treat murder hobos and not get rid of them, you probably just don't want to just straight up be like, oh yeah, your player character gets executed. So roll up a new character. Probably not the ending you or that player wants for their character. So instead you're going to be like, okay, somebody will, essentially like how it happens in our very capitalist world today, somebody basically buys your debt. It's like, I will buy that debt from these people. So they're going to pay the 200 gold and you're going to have to be in service to them until you can essentially pay it off. Which is a great way to take something, murder hobos, and then turn them into an adventure hook. Turn their behavior into an adventure hook. It's like, okay, now I've got to pay off this guy. Well, you have a very specific set of skills, Liam Neeson style. So, if that's the case, That person's gonna be like, I would like you to track down a treasure rumor I have, or, maybe you get bought. Let's say a guild buys your debt. Okay, well, you need to work as a caravan guard for me until you pay this off. So I have a very, maybe they have a very special shipment that's coming up. Maybe they're a merchant guild or something like that. And like, look, we have some really exotic stuff that's coming in, and I need to hire somebody who's already in trouble, who I don't think will steal this stuff from me, but are maybe more capable than our average, CR 1/8 guards that we usually hire for this. So we hired some people because we know people are coming after this. Or maybe they hire you for some skullduggery. Maybe they buy your debt and they're like, hey, you want to pay off your debt real quick? I need you to go kill this guy. I don't care how you do it. Just don't get it tied back to me. I know you're a murderer already. I've seen you kill somebody. I know you've got blood on your hands already, so you have no qualms about killing people. So I just need you to go kill this person. You go kill that person, your debt's paid. So immediately you can take that murder hobo tendency and be like, okay, now we can roll this up into an adventure. Now if they decide to go welch on their debt, they got bigger issues now. Now there are people going to be like bounty hunters and things actively hunting them down, in addition to the normal adventuring that they're doing, who are going to show up and try to grab them and pull them in. Or maybe it could be wanted dead or alive. They may be just paid to kill them. So, and that's always a nice little knife you can put in their back when they're like coming out of a dungeon. Maybe they finished the dungeon, they just fought the big boss, they've used all their resources, they're really kind of dogging it, and they're really expecting nothing to happen before they get back to town to sell off their loot. And that's when the bounty hunters show up to hit them when they're weak. So it gives them a higher chance of being able to grab the person they need to grab, or the whole group they need to grab, the whole group, and drag them off. And then they might be sentenced again. Maybe somebody buys their debt again, depending on what they did. Or, at that point, if you've given them every opportunity to not get executed or hanged or something like that, hey, if you're playing in a world that has repercussions for your actions, and you've been thrown a lifeline a couple of times, right? Sometimes you hang. Sometimes the player character just hangs. They just find their way to the gallows, despite your best efforts. And that's okay to pull the trigger on stuff like that, I think. It's like, hey, if you continue to break the laws and you continue to do these things and you're not doing it well enough to not get caught, or to change the kind of campaign that you're playing in, or amend your ways, then yeah, at some point you get dragged to the gallows and they just hang you, and you gotta roll up a new character. Or we're gonna stop playing the game, those two, depending on, because they could hang the whole party. Probably not. They're probably not gonna hang the whole party. They're probably only gonna hang one person, but they might hang the whole party. So, things to keep in mind. That was the Weregild. Let's go with keep using that example. Okay, so we had a commoner, they're 200 gold, but now we want some modifiers on them. Were they an appointed official? Probably not. They're just hanging out in the tavern, so no multiplier on that. Probably not a member of the royal family, but it could be somebody who was slumming it in disguise. So it turns out, that commoner you killed is actually like the cousin to the prince. So he's actually royal family. So actually, he is technically like low totem, like he's extended family, like he's far off down the line. But he is going to be 400 gold instead of 200 gold. This is Weregild. And then you can do some modifiers for, what if he was a slightly older, middle-aged person who has a double modifier? This is a person who's got kind of at the right intersection of physical strength as well as sort of like wisdom and accumulated knowledge. So they're right in that great place, and they typically have some sort of family that they're the head of. So if that was the case, so you went from 200 to 400, multiplied again, because it was a middle-aged commoner that used knifed in this tavern fight. Ooh, you gotta pay 800 gold for them, for their Weregild. You don't have 800 gold. Ooh, do we think that you can pay 800 gold? Who's going to buy that debt? It's not going to be somebody who's friendly to you. But the party could always throw in together, and maybe that's a good way to maybe approach that if you only have one. I'm not going to say problem. I'm not going to use the term problem player, but player that's maybe causing some friction in the group because they're kind of doing their own thing. They're kind of a wild card maverick. Be like, well, you're actually indebted to the rest of the adventuring party. They put their money together and bail you out and buy your debt. So now you owe them. And these people can definitely track you down if they need to. And then if you decide to run away from the party, you have exited the party, at which point you're going to have to make up a new character, and we have a discussion at the table about whether you should be a player in this campaign still or not. If you're going to bring in another character that is going to be very similar in the same thing. Especially because the party might be hunting that person down. If they just paid 800 gold and they're in the wind, they're probably going to hunt down that person and kill them or bring them to justice or do something with them. They're probably not just going to let them go with 800 gold in their pocket. Cause an 800 gold hole in their pocket. Probably not going to let that, go by the wayside. So the example I had down here was like, oh, what if you killed the king's cousin who was a middle-aged minor priest? Okay, minor clergy, 4,000 gold right off the bat. Royal family, double that, 8,000 gold. Middle-aged, 16,000 gold. You killed the wrong person. And the good thing is that you can do this for, like, bad guys, too. Because maybe that king's cousin, maybe they were the cult leader. Well, the king's never going to make any sort of public proclamation that, oh yeah, my cousin was leader of a terrible cult. They're going to cover that up, probably. And they're going to cover that up, and you're going to be stuck footing the bill. You're going to be the Mick in this situation. You're holding your hat there, and they're like, oh, yeah, thanks for all that help for clearing out that nasty cult business. Also, you owe me 16,000 gold. Or else we're gonna kill you or put you in jail. Ooh, you don't have it. Well, that's alright. The king will assume your guilt. But, you're gonna be the king's... the king's attack dogs for a little bit. He's going to send you on some quests. Or, lend you out to nobles around the area. Maybe this is the thing that kicks off. This would be a great way to... That situation would be a great way to kick off something like... what's the name of that adventure? The Tomb of Annihilation. It'd be a great way to kick off the Tomb of Annihilation. Being like, oh, this is the way you get wrapped into it. This person's like, oh, you killed this person. You owe us a great debt. What I actually need you to do is I have this problem with this wasting thing that's like killing people and their souls are getting lost and stuff. So if you can actually, we have a ship for you and we're going to send you to a totally different island way over there. Totally different continent island. And you need to go deal with that whole Acererak thing because it's kind of an issue for me and I don't really have any resources to give that. But you are in a perfectly good spot. You've already shown me that you can kill a nasty cultist, so probably a lich too, right? Or a demi-lich. Yeah, you got this. Get out of here. And that's it. Now, do they go and welch on that, especially once they get a boat and they're in a different land? Maybe. But then they're stuck in Chult. And you can spin it off and be like, oh, well, you can have your own adventure in the areas of Chult and not deal with the Tomb of Annihilation thing. But then maybe that's always in the background, so, it's like, oh, well, if any of you get, like, actually killed, resurrection magic is going to work on you, etc., etc. If you really want to keep playing that, you really want to play that adventure path. If not, whatever, you just let it go. But yeah, putting the PCs in a great debt like this is a great way, and an easy way, to get them embroiled in an adventure plot to pay off that debt through their adventurous deeds. It's a good way. Or sometimes you might just have them like, you gotta pay me back the debt with interest. So whatever you pull out of that, whatever adventures you go on, I get a pretty significant cut of what comes out of there. That's a good way to sort of support yourself with a local person to support themselves with adventurers. But yeah, that's Weregild. Super simple. Very easy framework. Just have a little thing. If you have problem players that go around killing people, like, one of the reasons I put this together is that I think coming up very soon in my own campaign, they're probably going to kill some people in the middle of a city, and if they get caught, I've got to have some way to deal with that, because the way they've been going, they haven't been rolling particularly well, so there's a likelihood they might get caught. And so I don't really just want to be like, oh, you kill somebody. Well, you get put in jail, and either the party has to jailbreak you or execute your character. So I need some other sort of like emergency e-brake to pull on it. And so for me, that's going to be like, oh, I can use Weregild. Okay, but you owe these people this money. So how you get that money is up to you. Maybe you pay it back through deeds, or maybe you pay it back through money themselves by doing other things. But yeah, that's Weregild. It's super simple, super easy to put together. That's it for that. Love it. Use it. Use your modifiers down here for age, children, not super useful. Braves or maiden, and these are just kind of life stage things I put together. Just kind of using a folk kind of language. So you have a child, you have a brave or maiden, which is basically a young adult. A mother or father, which is somebody who's into sort of their middle age and probably has a family or is a family age and tend to be very proficient in the profession they do and their role in society, so that's why they have the double amount. Children, not as useful, though they grow into that use later, but as they are, they're not that useful. And then a sage or crone is an older person, so they've probably stopped being particularly productive in that sense as well, or in growing more population. But the trade-off is they typically have a lot of knowledge, so they're still useful in that sort of sense from a societal perception of that. Which, POV, again, this is all wishy-washy, so this is not some sort of like broad political stance on anything. This is just some ideas, some spaghetti we're throwing against the wall that we can think could be useful here. So having that sage or crone would be like, okay, well, somebody who becomes older, they tend to be a little bit more of a liability, or they take more resources than they provide back into the society. So again, they're only down to half. And then this doesn't include things like outlaws. So outlaws are, the modifier is ×0, because an outlaw is somebody who is outside the law. That means they're not protected by the law. So that's always the weird situation with something like the stories like Robin Hood or things like that. It's like, yeah, they could hang them, but generally they would just kill them on sight if they came across them because they were outside the law. If they knew for certain that person was an outlaw, be like, you can do whatever you want to them. You can rob them, you can murder them, you can do all sorts of nasty, nefarious things to you, because that person is no longer protected by the law. That's the result of being outlawed. So keep that in mind as well too. So, if they break the Weregild, so let's say that you've got your murder hobos, they've taken the Weregild, and they've gone out, and they've decided to welch on the Weregild, or whatever, if they've done some other terrible thing that they probably should not have done, they can get outlawed and be like, hey, if anybody knows you're outlawed, it's kind of, they're free to do whatever. You have no protection from the law. So guards aren't going to step in to protect you if they know who you are. In fact, they may also try to kill you, because usually there's some sort of bounty price on your head. So they might kill you. So keep that in mind. Which would drastically change the way that you run your campaign. Now, usually with outlawry, that lasts for a certain time period. Usually it's like a year and a day. Not always, but a year and a day. So it's like, if you can survive for a full year being an outlaw, your outlawship ends. It's not like a full exile. Your outlawry time period ends, and then you're able to be reintroduced in society. I don't know how I feel about that. I might be wishy-washy, though. And a year is a long time in a D&D game, so it's a very long time. So likelihood is that they're gonna deal with it in some form or fashion before that. They could also just pay off the debt, right? And get themselves out, and that might work too. So that's that. The last thing that I want to talk about that we're going to probably go through pretty quickly is I want to... Boop, here we go. So let's talk about some 12 trap types. So we're just going to run through this pretty quickly. It should be pretty nice and simple. So, oftentimes I feel like traps are not explored very well in D&D in general. Most adventures, they're very, very superficial. They kind of either come down to one form. Either the trap is like a puzzle, which is not really a trap, or it's just like, hey, this thing happens and you get hit, and you take some damage. Which is great, but I mean, there's only so many pit traps you come across, or so many poison dart traps, or, you know, we tried out the old basics. So I wanted to talk about sort of these archetypes I use that kind of give me the ability to think more broadly and give myself personally a framework so I don't feel like I'm always doing the same thing over and over again. And that's by focusing in on sort of what specifically I want the trap to do. So what is a trap? Yeah, the trap is something that's made, some sort of device that's meant to catch or prevent the escape of a creature. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what traps are. So, given a few moments of thought, it's not a great description, even for D&D, right? That's kind of basics, but it's not super great definition. D&D, a trap is a hidden danger that's usually designed to harm a player character or present an obstacle to adventurers that they need to overcome to gain access to some sort of object or area. So like a trap chest, or pendulums of swinging blades that keep you from getting into the sarcophagus chamber or whatever. But when we operate using only that definition, you get some bland traps. Especially if you use those that are only provided like in the DnG. Those traps are really pretty boring. So, and they suck because you can do a lot more with them. So today I want to share sort of my personal 12 different trap types that you can start to use in your D&D game. Super easy, and 12 is a great number for a roll table, so I just use it like that. So, number 1, alarm. Classic trap comes up all the time. It's a tripwire. Anything, if you've played something like Skyrim where they have the bones that hang down, or tin cans and fall out on a string that they just make noise and tell people that, hey, somebody's here that's not supposed to be here. So the alarm, all it does is that it alerts people in the vicinity or in the dungeon that intruders are here. So it takes you, if you have player characters or a party that are trying to be like super sneaky and sneak through, and then they hit an alarm spell, it's like, oh, well, now somebody's coming to investigate, what are you going to do now? So immediately kind of like raises the stakes of any situation or scene that it's in. Number 2, another one, our first one that doesn't get used very much, anti-magic or dispel. So these are great ones to, if you've done a thing where you've maybe given the party a little bit of too many or a few too powerful magic items, is a good way to remind them that, hey, you can also just pretty easily even the playing field. Or if it's you have some sort of situation that you don't want to be solved by something that's very simple, like a fly spell, you can add that anti-magic or a dispel, something that stops magic from working in this area. Should be very interesting. So if you wanted to set up a situation, let's say it's an abandoned tower and the staircase on the inside has crumbled away and there's like a big section that's missing. And you're like, well, I don't want them to just be able to fly up to the next section. That's a little bit too easy. I want them to have a little bit of challenge. I'm like, all right, so there's some sort of like magic's gone wrong and it's anti-magic area that's happening here. And so if they zip up there, they won't be able to fly. They can't cast jump to make the jump, so they're gonna have to figure out some other way. Or maybe they're gonna have to figure out a way to get to the source of whatever the anti-magic or dispel effect is and be able to cross that out, dealing with the thing itself. And then, you know, as we do stuff in there, there's a chance wandering monsters come by and there's a combat, or maybe they just use a grappling hook and just climb up to the next bit of stair, or who knows what it is. There's a lot of different answers they can find, solutions they can find for that situation. Rather than having a problem that it can only be solved in one way, we just presented an obstacle, and then we think of what would be the easiest way to get through this obstacle, and here's a reason why you can't necessarily use that. Third one is charm or mind altering. So number 3 is charm or mind alteration. So you walk into something and it hits you with a confusion spell. This is a great thing to drop in if you have using enemies that are immune to some of these things, and then drop in something that they're not immune to. Same way that you might use poisonous gas in an area with dwarves or dwergar who have advantage against poison, or against some sort of creature that's totally immune to poison, like undead or something like that. So you throw those two together so that they're both a like 1-2 punch against your player character, so they have to deal with these two things at the same time in an encounter. And though I use poison as that answer, we could very much use, which is actually where is it? That's actually a harmer trap, because it gives you a condition, a poison condition, or provides exhaustion, or does some sort of damage to your stats, something that's not hit point damage. So it gives you a level of exhaustion if you fail, or it gives you the poison condition or the slowed condition, or does some sort of stat damage, like maybe you can feel it sort of seeping the strength out of you, and you lose a d4 on your strength for a little bit until you rest again. Something like that. Some sort of magical effect, so you can make traps that are a little bit more than just poison dart trap, pit trap, gout of flames, swinging pendulums. You can do weirder, more evocative trap types. So charm and mind alteration one, confusion's a good one to use. Illusion one is always a good illusion trap. I feel that often players are not looking for illusions in dungeons. That's usually not what they're going for. You can make a whole wall that's just not a real wall, and unless somebody goes to investigate that wall, they'll never know that there's an illusion. And maybe you can hide all sorts of weird stuff behind it. Maybe that's a trap, like maybe that's there's illusion over the doorway that leads directly into the treasury room or something, where there's something of super value but it's just hidden from them, so unless they spend the time to search for secret doorways, they're never going to come across it. They're just going to walk right past it. Or and then they have to learn from somebody else, or maybe they find footprints that go up to a wall and they're like, what the heck, there must be a secret door here, and then turns out it's not a secret door, it's actually just an illusion. Maybe that illusion has a trap behind it, and you know, you can get fancy with it if you want to. Just don't make it too fancy. Detainment. Okay, detainment's super easy type. It just means that they try to jail you up. If you've ever watched any sort of heist movie, usually does it. Like, oh, we've got to get the Hope Diamond, and they drop in and they grab the Hope Diamond, but it heads off the pressure plate, and then like all the bars come down around the doors. So the detainment means it keeps people from exiting. So it's keeping whoever's not supposed to be in here, they have to stay in here until somebody comes and lets them out. A good one I've used, and I guess not in too recent game, the last one I used that really kind of sticks in my mind, is I had a cell you could walk into that has a trapdoor flap, and you could fall into it, and it goes a shoot down to just a jail cell on the floor below. Super simple. Don't think about it too much. There's a monster in that room that they fight, so there's just an X on the floor that's just like a pit trap, and it's like if somebody happens to go through that square in the battle map, then they slide down about 10 feet and get dropped off in this dungeon cell, and they got to figure out how to get back into the fight. In that specific case, there's actually a different monster that's down there in the jail cell that they run into, who's undead, I think. I think he was an undead. So just to show that, like, whoever was fighting this monster before fell through this trapdoor and got turned into an undead. We already talked about harmers. Anything that gives you condition, exhaustion, stat damage. Something that basically does something other than give you hit point damage, which is really, really, I think, key for really doing a really good trap. Is a trap that doesn't focus on just dealing a little bit of hit point damage. Especially as you get higher and higher levels of play, player characters can soak hit point damage like crazy. Like, doesn't it make sense to have a poison dart that does a fireball's worth of damage if you get hit with it? Probably not. I mean, you could, but wouldn't it be cool if it just did something like exhaustion to them? Or gave them some sort of condition, or it seeps into them and it, like, instead of, maybe it does constitution damage to them. So it's like, not only do you lose hit points, you actually reduce your max hit points for some amount of time. And that really kind of twists the knife, so it feels like a better trap than just, hey, you took hit point damage away from me, whatever, whenever we stop to rest, I'll just get the hit points back with the hit die. Being like, oh no, I'm going to take hit points away from you. It's not a ton of hit points, but it is some hit points, and I'm going to remove your ability to get those hit points back for a little bit of time by reducing the max. So that's some fun way to approach that. Lockdown's exactly the same. Lockdown prevents egress, leaving the space. So I just got this backwards. So detainment is about putting the person in like a cell or something. Lockdown is about making sure that you don't get out. So detainment is, so I mixed up my examples with the diamond. So they have the diamond thing where they have the like big cage that falls down around the diamond with the person holding it. That would be a detainment trap. It trapped you and the thing. The bars coming down around the doors, that's actually a lockdown trap. So slightly different. They do slightly different things. Lockdown gives you the ability for the players to still like move about. Usually it's just they can't leave the area. So a detainment trap could be something that alerts guards at the front of a goblin cave to be like, okay, well, we're going to seal it up. Or they have an ogre move a boulder in front of the doorway to the cave so nobody can get out. And unless you can figure out a way to push a big old boulder, which you probably have somebody in your party that has strength, so you guys can probably figure that out. It just won't be quick or silent way to get out. We talked about harmers. That's lockdown. Monster Maker. So a Monster Maker trap is a trap that awakens or summons a monster. So it's like, oh, you walked into a room, you guys aren't expecting combat, boom, combat happens. Classic ones include things like Rug of Smothering, awakened items. That, hey, you hit a trigger plate and stuff gets real Beauty and the Beast real quick, but with a murderous tint to it. Getting attacked by tables and cutlery and all sorts of weird stuff. Or just summons a monster. If there's not a monster there, you can just summon a monster. So maybe it summons a bunch of... You could awaken gargoyles or something like that, or turn statues into gargoyles. That'd be a cool one. Summon monsters. It summons a gaggle of pixies or something. I don't know. I don't know what your dungeon is. Something that will make sense in your dungeon. And having stuff like that. Awaken doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be an awakened item. Like, you could have a sleeping dragon somewhere, maybe at the bottom layer of your dungeon. And maybe a dragon's not a great example. Maybe let's do... what's a good awaken? Awakened ones are so common. You step on the thing and it awakens all the undead that burst out of their sarcophagi and rush at you. That's a classic awaken trap, awaken monster trap. It's like, yeah, there's mummies in all of them, but the mummies don't do anything unless you trip the trap. Otherwise, they just look like dead bodies. Of course, if you screw with them, maybe they wake up there, but that'll be up to you as a DM. Maybe you don't. Maybe you let them screw with the bodies as much as they want, and it's only if they hit the pressure plate do they wake up, which might throw your characters for a loop, a little bit of a curveball, because usually feels like in a Dungeon Master situation, in that situation, as soon as you touch the thing that is a monster, the monster awakens. But what if it didn't? What if it waited specifically till you were leaving the room, or you were walking around the room, and you had already touched 1, 2, maybe even 3 of the sarcophagi and gotten stuff out of them? It's like, then you accidentally hit the trap trigger and they wake up. So they're on guard, you get them, you lull them into that sense of security, and then boom, the trap happens. Like, oh, you were never safe to begin with. And maybe you can get them that way. Just to keep things, keep it spicy. Keep it running. A murder trap. It does what it says on the tin. This is your classic trap that's like, I do a bunch of hit point damage to you. Yeah, I mean, those are still fine. And if the trap's uninteresting, make it quick. usually the way that I go about it. It's like, okay, if it's just a poison dart trap, boom, you hit it, you missed it, you take this much damage, or you reduce that by half if you are resistant to poison or immune to it, then you don't take any damage except the dart. That's it, it's done, we move on. There's still a reason to have something that just does hit point damage. That's perfectly fine for a trap. Just it shouldn't be all the traps all the time. It should be, in this case, 1/12 of the traps. I mean, I guess if you add stat damage from the armor, I guess it's 1 in 6 that does that. If it reduces Constitution, that's basically like getting hit. Number 10, Object Animator. I use the example during the Awakened Monster, but it's the same thing. Object Animator, you trip over the thing. Uh-oh, Golem came to life. Same sort of thing, or a fun thing to do. One of the examples that I used in one that has... I made it into a hazard because it was something that was not working properly, which is a good way to make traps or hazards, is to be like, this magic was supposed to do something and it's doing it wrong. I had this dwarf hold where it's like, as soon as you cross the threshold into the dwarf hold's like main hall, what it was supposed to do is it was supposed to magically remove the visitor's armor and weapons and put them in like a little cupboard. Like put them in like a coat check for them. Like, so it just automatically just being like, you are friends here, you're supposed to be here. It takes your stuff, puts them in a little cubby, so that way the dwarves don't actually accidentally get into a drunken fight and kill each other. Decide to do a blood feud in the middle of the Great Hall. So that's what it was supposed to do. It pulls off their items, puts it over there. It's also supposed to like set places for them at the long tables in the hall, and put down like cutlery and flatware and dishes and probably food and drink. And this was all a magical effect that happened. It was like a magical hall. It was a big woo-woo, like, see how much power I have as the Lord that I can do this with magic and serve you. It's very sort of awe-inspiring kind of thing. But this is a ruined dwarven hold, and that magic just doesn't quite work right. So, the first part of it works pretty well. It strips off their armor and weapons and shields and stuff like that, and puts them in a cupboard that is actually out of reach as a medium creature. So that way nobody could get to it easily. So it puts it slightly up on the wall out of reach. So that part works fine. The second part doesn't work so well. So instead of setting a table, it's just a flurry, a maelstrom of cutlery and dishes and stuff that just pummel the player characters when they cross the threshold. So just a fun little thing. It does a little bit of damage to them, and mainly the thing is like it does some damage to them, and they have to figure out how to get their stuff out of the cupboard that is now out of reach. So they've got to like boost each other up and open it up, and that takes some time, and they've got to put their armor back on, stuff like that. So then they roll for potentially wandering monsters coming by, and that's kind of that room. There's other stuff going on in that room, but that's sort of the major effect is upon first entering. So that's a good idea of a very funky way to use something like an object animator trap. Is that sometimes it's not doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, and that's sometimes a better trap than it just being like, oh, the object animates, it's a crossbow, a magic crossbow that just starts shooting bolts at people. So yeah, that's a very basic one, but if you put a little bit more thought into it, you can make it something fun or weird. 11 is remote control. What is a remote control trap? A remote control trap is a trap that it's really not a trap at all. Really, it's something for them to interact with. It's like a control panel, which is sometimes I call it a control panel trap. Is that you have to go and you mess with it, and you don't get any feedback. But it's changing something else in the dungeon. And so maybe there's stuff that's labeled, maybe it's in ancient Elvish, and so you have to do like a linguist kind of check, a history check or something like that, and be able to speak Elvish to try to kind of parse what it is, or somebody has to spend a spell slot to cast Comprehend Languages, and then they can actually read the control panel and be like, oh, okay, so if we do this actually opens up portcullis somewhere further down, or awakens all the automatons that are like the natural defenses of the place. Maybe it sets off some other type of trap. Something like that. It's like, oh, this was actually the self-destruct sequence. I'm glad we didn't pull that lever first, because that would have been bad if we had done that. And then it would be counting down, doing the classic countdown. It was like self-destruct in T-minus 10 minutes, but only in ancient Elvish that nobody can understand. So it's only like they cast comprehend languages after the first time. Now then they get the 9-minute mark and they're like, oh no, we gotta get out of here because this whole place is about to fall in on itself, or whatever is gonna happen with it. It's gonna purge the whole place with fire or whatever. So that's a fun way to do that with the remote control. And the last one we talk about is a resource eater. Resource eater is very similar to Harmer. Basically the difference is, so a standard murder trap is a resource eater. And we should talk about, I do want to touch on one thing, why I call it a murder trap instead of just like a hit point trap. The idea of the murder trap is that it is actively trying to kill somebody. So you need to set up a trap that is deadly. So, and I use the limited damage numbers with my own little sprinkle of salt on them. They're a little bit different. So for me, a murder trap would deal damage. I determine first off, is it going to try to hit everybody in here? Because if so, we're going to use D6s. Or is it only trying to hit one person? If it's only trying to hit one person, we're going to use D10s. So, I've got a little dice roller pulled up next to me. Let's say that this is a 5th level party. They run across a classic murder trap, and this one fires some sort of like disintegration style ray, some sort of arcane blast, and hits somebody. It only targets one person at a time. They're 5th level, so they're going to do 5d10 plus 5 damage because they got hit. Okay, they're going to take 41 points of damage. So that's quite a bit of damage. It's enough to... It should never probably kill somebody outright unless they don't have all their hit points. If they have all their hit points, it's not going to kill them outright. But it will take a pretty significant chunk out of them that it feels like it was a deadly attack. So let's say if that was a... So 41 hit points is not that much damage for somebody like a 5th level barbarian, probably. Like, it's still a chunk, but it's not a bunch. But that might be all the hit points for a 5th level wizard. I'm gonna look at, actually, I don't think I have any. I'm just gonna look up what my character has that I have right now. Because I've got a... Hold up. I've got a 7th level character. He has 76 hit points. He has a D10 hit die because he's a ranger. But taking 40 points of damage, 41 points of damage is over half his hit points. So that's tough. That's a lot of damage. Like, that's if you're gonna put something on the board that's gonna be like, this is meant to kill people, it should feel like it's trying to kill people, not the sort of thing where it's like, oh, and you take a D6 or a D4 of dart damage, like a poison lock on the chest or something like that, and you're like, oh, well, you take a D4 and piercing damage and 2d6 poison damage, so that's a total of 7 points of damage. You're like, okay. If I'm a higher level adventurer, I don't care about that. That's not enough to keep me down. So if you're making a murder trap, it needs to be like really trying to hone in. So, but the other way to do it is a resource eater trap, which is something that does damage, has negative effect, or takes a resource from a player character that is not their hit points. Their hit points is a resource, but this targets different types of resources. So one of the ways that I do it, and you can get pretty weird with them because it's kind of a weird idea. So you can be like, it can take hit dice from you. Instead of eating hit points, what it does is it destroys your ability to heal yourself. So it could be some sort of enervating ray that like you feel like your energy sapped out of it. Or you feel like a sickening ray and it makes you feel kind of sick. It could steal spell slots from people. It could destroy supplies or gear, like a rust monster kind of does, or a gray ooze does. Black pudding do it too? I know, where it can damage gear instead, or eats things like magic items. Maybe it dispels magic on magic items. That would also be a dispel spell, but the thing was that it specifically targets unweaving magic on magic items. That would be interesting, though. That's a pretty big swing as a DM, so you probably want to make the DC on that really low, and maybe do it like a two-step thing where it's like petrification works in 5e in 2024. It's like, oh, you get hit by the petrification ray, you're not immediately petrified. You're usually like slowed and disadvantaged to dexterity saving throws or stunned or something like that. And it's like, then if you fail again, then you're petrified. So if you make it basically a safe spot where it's like, okay, that gives you an opportunity for anybody to give you like guidance or use a help action or something to like give you advantage on the next saving roll that you can do to make sure that doesn't happen when you have something that's like, oh, I don't want to lose my +1 sword, because that sucks if you're like a fighter or something like that. You don't want to lose that sword. So making it 2 steps, gonna be like, well, I mean, what are you gonna do? You failed it twice, man. You had advantage on the second roll, and you couldn't roll anything above a 3. The sword's gone. The sword's no longer magical. Sorry. And then it becomes its own quest to be like, hey, do you want to re-magic the sword? Or maybe you can get some of your friends in there who can help to figure out where that magic's going, if that's part of the dungeon or not. And maybe they can figure out a way to re-enchant your sword with that energy. Or maybe, right, it sucks the magic out of your sword, and maybe that's stored in some sort of well, and maybe that's the final boss room, and you do the final boss room, and you're able to actually put the sword in there into this sort of arcane crucible and reforge the sword using smithing tools and magic arcana studies and alchemy and all sorts of weird stuff. And you can reform the sword, and you can not only just reattach the magic to the sword, you can actually turn that sword into maybe like a +2 sword or a specific type of +1 sword. And it's like, not only did you get the magic back, you got a little extra loot on top of it, which feels really cool. Like when they take that extra step to be like, I want to specifically re-enchant the sword if I can. So reward you that way. Then I have some information about like why do people not like traps. We can run through some of this real quick. It's not super important. I think I've made the case probably up here at the top. Hopefully you guys are with me on this, where it's like basic traps are really boring. Basic traps are boring, so I like to use these more. They're not necessarily complicated, they just approach things differently and try to do things other than just do hit point damage. Because whenever your trap does hit point damage, it's not very interesting. So, oh yeah, I don't want to forget this last part. And this is something I got from Ragi, which is the guy behind Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which is an OSR book. Some thoughtful tips from him about placing traps. So you don't want to place traps where dungeon denizens frequent most of the time. So if this is a place like this is where kobolds live. Actually, kobolds are an interesting example, so let's use them. So kobold warrens, usually most of their traps are specifically focused towards medium-sized creatures because they are small-sized creatures and they're weak, but they're really good at making traps. But they don't want to be hit by their own traps, so they want to, and they trap all over the place. So what they do is they focus on traps that will only hit medium or larger creatures. So that means any pressure plates usually aren't triggered by small creatures, as long as they're not wearing like heavy armor. So small creatures, so that means that anything that's like those classic like poison dart traps or flame gout or pendulum swings or stuff, they're all kind of set up just a little bit higher, so that way if there was a kobold, they'd go right above them as they're walking by. And so they're only hitting medium creatures, which is an interesting way to do that. But if it was let's say, hobgoblins instead of kobolds, well, hobgoblins are just as likely to hit the traps as the players are, so typically you want to place traps where they don't frequent very often. So if it's like a backdoor entrance or something that they usually, like a postern gate, something like that, where they typically don't have somebody actively watching it because it's like a secret entrance, that's usually where you put a trap, because nobody should be going in and out of that thing very often. So you put a trap there. Or you put it in a room in which the dungeon denizens know where it is and they can use it to their advantage, like trying to funnel in a battlefield, trying to push player characters towards a pit trap or something like that. Trying to do that. So they know where it is and they're trying to push them towards it, trying to use it to their advantage. Alright, so why do so many dungeon masters not like basic traps? Well, and actually we can just go here because I'm just going to be reading this off. So, why do so many dungeon masters not like basic traps? Even hate basic traps? I think there's 3 pretty common reasons. They're punitive, and they don't offer any rewards for doing it. Right? You just take damage and that's it. They provide no thoughtful player choice or agency. It's just a thing that happens. And as a response, play slows down as the party begins obsessing over potential traps. That's usually the killer that I find. Is that once you hit somebody with a trap, a party with a trap, they're like, oh, okay, this dungeon is trapped. And so once you do one, they're like, oh, well, if there's one trap in here, there's gotta be more. So they can really slow things down. So on paper, that all sounds like pretty legit reasonings, but I do want to offer some counterpoints to that. I think when placed thoughtfully in your dungeon or in your adventure, wherever they are, traps do offer rewards. And I think that's the easiest way to showcase that is basically every trap chest that's ever been in D&D usually has something nice in it. You don't trap chests that don't have anything in them, unless you're Baldur's Gate 3, and then you usually have trap chests that don't have particularly interesting things in them sometimes, especially as you get into higher levels. I think the traps more often offer clear rewards compared to many other combats or puzzles or hazards that players come across in challenges. So usually you're trapping something, and very much because always the thing that you go to for something like traps, as the example, is the Indiana Jones with the little golden idol. It's like, yeah, that's trapped because that is clearly worthwhile, and you see the reward before the trap. The trap is hidden. But often, if you're having a combat, you don't know that the monsters typically have magic items on them or healing potions or something like that unless they use them in combat, or that the chest in the corner is filled with loot. I mean, you see a chest, but it could just have clothes or whatever in it. You don't know that, especially if it's not locked. And for thoughtful player choice or agency, I like to reserve that for actual encounters, like complex traps. So if the trap is more of a puzzle sort of situation, like the chamber is filling with water, or the walls are closing in with spikes on them, it's going to squish you. Those are more puzzles for you to get out than I feel like really traps, so I kind of throw them under the puzzle area when I think about them playing them. I think the basic traps should be super fast. They should show up fast, they should do what they do, and be resolved and move on. I think traps play the slowest when PCs find and attempt to circumvent or disarm them. When they're spending time thinking about, oh, I'm trying to find traps all the time, or how do I get around this trap, even when the traps necessarily don't do a ton of damage or do anything very difficult. And I think that is the point where the player agency kind of goes into play. So I think it's very easy to just let players roll a thieves tool check to disarm a trap. But I think one of the things we should do, if you really want to focus in on that player choice and agency, is have them describe to you, like, tell me, what are you doing to disarm the trap? Like, give me an idea. You know it's like a false floor pit trap from my earlier example. You know that it falls down into a chute. You can trigger the trap and see it, and then it just springs back up. So how are you getting around this? This covers the whole hallway. Like, what are you doing? It's like, can we wedge something into it? It's like, not really, because the trapdoor falls, so you'd have to wedge it from the underside. So how are you going to do that? Like, oh, alright. Like, maybe you can figure out a way to do it. Maybe you can't. Maybe in the end they just decide to jump over it. Which is a perfectly reasonable situation. A perfect reasonable resolution to that. And maybe they have some chalk or something and they just mark a big X on it so they know that when on their way back, hey, remember there's a trap right there. super and easy, and they mark it, and then you can tell them as they walk back down the hallway later in the dungeon or coming out of the dungeon or whatever, and you can be like, and you come across a big X marked on the floor in chalk. And ideally, they will remember that. If so, you should probably, if they don't, you should probably edge on your player's behalf, kind of hedge their bet, and be like, well, you remember marking X here. Maybe that was, a month ago, depending on how often we play. Maybe you don't remember what that X is, but you know that you put the X there. You know this is your marking. And so maybe they think about it for a second and be like, oh, it's gotta be a trap, right? That's why we put it there. And they can do a little investigation and be like, oh yeah, it's trapped. So we gotta hop back over it. And then it gives them a little bit more of a meat in the game. If you want them to focus in on it more, if you want it to take up a little bit more time. Especially if it's something they can circumvent easily, but have them go through the steps of actually circumventing it instead of being like, yes, you jump over it. And I don't think that there's really any difference between an overcautious group, which is a group that's always looking for traps, and a thorough group of players. So I think you have a group of players, and most players fall into one of those two camps. So either they beat the bad guy, they finish the climax, and then they're like, but actually we're going to make sure that we search every single room of the dungeon before we leave to make sure that we don't leave any loot behind. Or the people who are like, we're trying to avoid any and all traps and ambushes on our way to the finale. Both of those people take a lot longer in the dungeon than just, okay, we gotta go do the thing, and then we did the thing, and now we're getting out of here. And generally, groups fall into one of those two categories. I think it's very rare that you get a situation in which you have a group who just shows up in the dungeon, does the thing, gets out of the dungeon without fully exploring it. Or being very cautious after they hit a trap. More cautious after they hit something like a trap. So, are they scouring every nook and cranny for hidden passages? Are they making sure that they visited every single room of the dungeon, even after they've already completed the adventure? All those things still take up a lot of time and a lot of empty time at the table. So for me, I think that timers are your friend here. I keep the pressure on the group so they have to balance the caution of traps versus the caution of lollygagging in the dungeon. So I think there are negative pressures and positive pressures you can apply to this. So a negative pressure would be like, you need to interrupt the ritual before they summon the demon. Okay, so time is an aspect, and so the longer you guys checking every single 10 square feet as you go through the dungeon is something that actually makes it less likely that you're going to complete your mission. And then you can also do things like positive pressure. So the positive pressure are things that you add in. So the more you guys faff about and you look for traps and do that sort of stuff, the more likely it is that the more wandering monster checks I'm going to make, because you're spending more time in the dungeon. And that's more combats that you're going to have to get into to get the same sort of reward. And that's the way that I use wandering monsters. We've done a whole video about it. You can go watch that if you want to. Is that for my role, the wandering monsters serve a very specific purpose, which is to be sort of like your DM stick in a dungeon and be like, hey, you guys need to keep moving. Slap, slap, slap. There's lots of treasure in here. That's the carrot. And the mission that you're trying to accomplish, there's the carrot. That's what you're trying to do. And then, like, if you're taking too long or you're focusing on things that aren't important, wandering monster check will slap on the bottom and be like, hey, you need to get moving. Hey, you're stuck. Get moving. And so it kind of gives you this idea. It's like, at some point there is a balancing act where it's like, are we more likely to be more inconvenienced by getting hit by a trap or by a wandering monster combat? Which one of those will be the bigger inconvenience? And that will determine how slowly we go through the dungeon. So you want them to feel like they're on the lookout, so they can keep the lookout sometimes, but then try to maybe make it a little bit more obvious for areas that feel like they should be tracked. You can also hand wave a lot of that stuff. If they're looking for traps in places that aren't have traps, it's like you look and you check and it's not there. You look and you check and you don't see any traps. You look and you check and there's not any traps. And I will assume, if you want to, you can be like, I will assume that you are always looking for traps going forward. And we do that. And I think that's one of the biggest, highlights one of the biggest differences in the way that I see D&D than I think probably a lot of contemporary dungeon masters probably see it, especially people who came into the hobby playing later editions of D&D, so that I view D&D as a resource management game, which is a very kind of OSR kind of style look at the game. The group is there they're in the dungeon or wherever, they're trying to accomplish something, and they have a limited amount of hit points and hit dice and abilities that they can use and spell slots to do it with. So one of our jobs as a Dungeon Master is to dial in the pressure by chipping away at those resources throughout the adventure. This is one of the things where I look at people talk about when you hear a lot of Dungeon Masters talk about, like, oh, well, the players are always like running roughshod over my encounters and stuff like that, and that's because you're not whittling away at their resources enough. You're letting them save them all up for one big strike, and not punishing them after they use that big strike. Punishing. The world punishes them. I don't punish them. The world punishes them. It's like, great, you went and took out the big bad guy. This place is still filled with, like, a ton of orcs that you're going to have to fight your way out of, and they all know that you just killed their leader. So probably one of them's jockeying to become the new leader and trying to rally the troops. There's still a lot of adventure to be had. You're not quite out of the woods yet. So I think this is one of the places the traps do a really good job for dialing in pressure to sort of chip away at resources. They're a fast, diegetic way in-universe to create some tension and prompt some thoughtful choices, just like do you want to be careful looking for traps and run into more monsters, or avoid monsters but potentially run into more traps as you're running around the dungeon? I think of traps, I think a useful way to maybe think about them is like an artillery bombardment. You're doing it it's a bombing run to soften up an enemy strong point before you rush in with your infantry or whatever, those very warlike terms. But basically, you want to soften them up before you actually do the big fight. And so I think that's useful. So if you think about your big fight being probably the climax of your adventure, the big bad evil guy that's in there, the villain, the people who are summoning the demons, etc. Like, that's the big climax. And so you want to soften up the PCs before they get there. So that's why you have all these little combats in there, and you have traps and hazards that hit them. So that way they're not running, they don't go through basically, and there's no point to have this entire front section of a dungeon if the only fight that matters is this one climactic fight. If so, we don't need to waste, if that's what you want to do and you want to throw a Nova encounter at them that's going to be super hard and just absolutely balanced or aligned to be taken on by a full suite party of characters with their full stack of abilities, that's great. Go do that. You don't need a dungeon to do that. You don't need to run all the other part of the dungeon to do that. That all becomes superfluous. So all that other stuff is all the softening up stuff before that climactic fight. That's why it's there. Also because, dungeon delving's fun. And the combat's fun, and getting other rewards and tricks and overcoming challenges, all that stuff's fun too. But also use it as a useful part of your game to whittle away those resources, and then that climactic encounter doesn't always have to be this gigantic 2-hour combat. It can be kind of a standard 30 minutes to an hour combat. It's just going to feel a lot more deadly because your players aren't going to have as many resources at their disposal to deal with it. So the traps kind of cut at your group's tactical superiority before the next combat. And so if you have traps and combats all stair-stepping their way up to the climactic one, you should be cutting at them little by little, whittling away their resources, and force them to make decisions about how they're going to deal with the dungeon. Like, can they take a short rest? Can they spend hit dice? Do they want to use healing magics or items right now? Do they want to save those for later? Do they want to gamble continuing on in the dungeon when they're down on HP? Do they want to leave the dungeon to try to rest? And if so, are they going to be alerted? Is it going to be harder to come back in later? All these sorts of stuff. When you put yourself in a position where they have to start being prompted with a bunch of questions they have to answer, then that's when you're in the the important player choice, player agency area. And then you can sit down back as Dungeon Master and be like, you guys figure that out. I don't know. And that's pretty much it. That's all I wanted to say. Because the traps, in my mind, traps are supposed to be punitive. They're not. I think, like any good obstacle in D&D, they need to provide consequences for failure. If you didn't find the trap, if you didn't avoid the trap, and you didn't disarm the trap, you should probably take some sort of consequence for that action. That's 3 things. You really only need to pass one of those things. Maybe 2 of them. You don't necessarily have to find the trap if you have a good save and you can avoid the trap. If you don't need to avoid the trap, if you can find the trap, you can either go around it, or you can do a second check to try to disarm it so it doesn't work, and then think about how you do that. So that's about identifying the trap and understanding what it does, and that can be a whole thing that you kind of play out mechanically, rather than just being like, oh, it's a poison dart trap. Be like, oh, you look down the hallway, you do notice, you made a really good investigation check, that you see that there are little small holes along one side of the wall, and then as you're investigating the other wall, you do see small, like, divots of where things seem to have struck in the wall and chipped away at it at certain points, and those points seem to be in line with the holes. And I mean, you don't have to tell them that, because you're basically explaining what a poison dart trap looks like, the effects of it, and then they'll go, oh, that's probably a poison dart trap. Great. That's a lot. I think that's a lot more evocative than being like, it's a poison arrow trap. What are you gonna do about it? Then you look at a situation like that, and okay, how do you disarm it? Well, it's probably a pressure plate. We gotta find the pressure plate. And that's identifying it before you find the trigger, so now it's its own little thing. And then you're like, okay, well, how do we stop the triggering? Can we, like, wedge it somehow? Can we just hop over it and go through it? Is there only one pressure plate? Maybe there's another pressure plate further down the corridor that we might run into. Like halfway through, usually, right, it's like a gauntlet of arrows go. So maybe there's like a pressure plate at the very front. Probably a pressure plate on each side, maybe. And then maybe there's one in the middle, too, that maybe they're not thinking about. So just in case somebody hops over the first one, and they're not paying attention, they might step on the one while they're right in the middle, and then everybody gets shot. Be very interesting. Or maybe the pressure plate's just in the middle. So it's in the middle of the hallway. And so it's not until basically everybody's in range, the entire party basically gets into the poison dart range, that the first person might hit it, and they get shot. That's also a good way to be like, if they have to disarm the trap, they have to put themselves in a place of danger to do it. So the rogue sneaks up ahead and finds the pressure plate and is trying to like wedge it so it won't depress. But if they screw that up, they're going to get shot with the poison darts, like immediately. Like there's no chance, no save. Like you can't hide from this. Like if you fail this check, it's in, like, because the hole's like right here. It's definitely going to shoot you. That's another way to handle it. So, you know, that's just my thoughts on traps in general. And so when we talk about like, oh, it's punitive, but it also doesn't offer any rewards. And then we already talked about like the chests that offer rewards, but also for other rewards, there are plenty of combats and puzzles and hazards that don't offer rewards. Sometimes, generally a puzzle in most dungeons, the solution to solving the puzzle is just doing the rest of the dungeon. Usually it's like a door or something of that nature that's stopping you. It's usually not some sort of specific loot. Sometimes it is, but a lot of the times it's just continuing the adventure, which is not super great design. There was a video I watched recently, and I put a comment on it because the professional designer talking about the way that he does the design, and I was like, ooh, because like you do want to avoid anything that's like a bottleneck thing with like a puzzle or a trap or something like that, where it's like if they just fail to do it, or they can accidentally lock themselves out of the rest of the adventure if this is the only way into the rest of the adventure, and they can't either figure it out, or they accidentally, because players are wild, they somehow screw it up so badly that they can't actually progress in the adventure. So you always want anything that's like a puzzle or a trap or something like that that have some other pathing way to get to the adventure, so they're not like soft locked out of the adventure. Yeah, that's everything I wanted to talk about traps. I know it said that we were maybe going to do some prep today, some session prep, but we are quite a bit over time. We are past time than I usually like to stream. We're a little over 3 hours, so I think that's where I'm going to call it for this stream. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. I hope this was helpful and useful, and you got some knowledge or some new ideas or some things. If you have your own ideas about traps and what could go into that, different trap types that aren't covered here, that'd be super great. If you have information about the way you do hex stocking, if it's somewhat different than the way I do it, then throw those in. If you have some way to deal with murder hobos or some other punitive measures for things like committing murder in the game as a player character and how you want to deal with that as opposed to Weregild, throw that stuff in the comments. I'd love to read that stuff and see if I add to my own milieu of dungeon master stuff that I pull into my games. But that is gonna be it for me. It's always fun. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Alright? Bye bye.